Hey, you're watching my official compilation channel, but if you want to see my newest videos as soon as they're uploaded, check out my main channel, Chat History. Alright, enjoy the video. 15 minutes of useless history. Wait, what? Poland had a bear soldier that served during World War II. His name was Wojtek, and he was a good boy. In 1386, France executed a pig that killed a child. It was arrested, faced trial, and was hanged. Poor thing. During the Great Depression, people would often resort to using potato sacks as clothes. Ancient Mayans worshipped turkeys, as they were seen as vessels for the gods. The 69th and 420th words of the Declaration of Independence are to and districts. The Ford Motor Company was founded in 1903 and hasn't produced a good car since. It's said that in Ohio in 1895, only 2 cars existed across the entire cursed state, and they crashed into each other. Famous scientist Albert Einstein was once offered the presidency of Israel. He turned it down. The British Empire had around 120 colonies at its height in the 20th century. Robert Lincoln, son of US President Abraham Lincoln, was present or nearby during 3 different presidential assassinations. He was just a few blocks away from the Ford Theater when Papa Abraham caught a bullet in the back of his skull. He was an eyewitness to President Garfield's assassination, and also experienced President McKinley getting absolutely cannoned in the chest. Afterward, little Bobby Lincoln refused any future invites to presidential events. William Higginbotham, a physicist who worked on the atomic bomb, invented the first video game in 1958 using an oscilloscope. He called his creation Tennis for Two. It was a precursor to Pong. About 4% of the Normandy beaches are made up of leftover shrapnel from the D-Day invasions of World War II. The first European settlement in present-day Uruguay was formed in 1527. It was called San Lazaro and was, you guessed it, a Spanish settlement. Ancient Roman warships were equipped with huge fucking flamethrowers that were used in naval warfare. They called it Greek fire, and boy was it effective. In the year 1204, Valdemar II of Denmark was recognized as king in Norway. Ketchup used to be sold as medicine in the 1830s. George Washington died on December 14, 1799 at the age of 67. His last words were, "'Tis well." In ancient Greece, skirts were considered manly and pants were for women. Nothing like letting the boys breathe, you know?
The record for the world's longest stare was set in 2011 in Australia. The loving glare lasted 41 minutes straight and 0 minutes gay.
French monarch King Charles VI suffered from a psychological disorder called the glass delusion, where he was thoroughly convinced that his entire being was made out of glass, and thus likely to shatter into pieces at the slightest poke. He wore clothes enforced with iron rods and prevented anyone from touching him. In 1633, the Shanxi province in Imperial China was ground zero to the Great Plague in the late Ming Dynasty. More than half of the population got sick that year, and over 90% of the province's population was dead 9 years later. The Roman Colosseum used to be covered in marble, but after Rome fell, the marble was looted by big-titty goth pillagers. The Mariana Trench was first discovered in 1875. It is measured at about 36,000 feet or 11,000 meters deep at its lowest point. Dr. John Kellogg, creator of the famous cereal brand, invented cornflakes and graham crackers to prevent his patients from gooning. The ancient African city of Timbuktu was founded in the 5th century. It served as a popular trade route for salt, gold, and people begrudgingly forced to work for free. During the 18th century in England, carrying around a pineapple was a telltale sign that you were rich as hell. Haters gonna hate, bruh. The chainsaw was invented by medical doctors as a tool for symphysiotomy, a procedure for aiding in childbirth. There's an ancient text called the Voynich manuscript, handwritten in an unknown language that has never been deciphered. Wait, what's that say? Huh, would you look at that? Famous silly-named astronomer Galileo Galilei discovered the planet of Jupiter using a handheld telescope in 1610. So you know how the US government banned alcohol during the Prohibition in the 1920s and 1930s? Well, people still wanted to get absolutely slizzard, so they resorted to stealing and drinking industrial alcohol. You know, like rubbing alcohol used to treat wounds? Yeah, you're not supposed to drink that stuff because industrial alcohol is commonly denatured, meaning that toxic additives like kerosene or acetone are mixed in to prevent people from drinking it. What's fun is that this didn't really stop anyone from power chugging the stuff, so they could feel all wavy and wiggly. The mass consumption resulted in the deaths of around 10,000 Americans. Cheers. The most successful pirate in history was a woman. Qingxi was the commander of the Chinese Red Flag Fleet, which consisted of over 300 warships and about 80,000 crew. Move over, Blackbeard. About 90% of the world's freshwater is frozen in Antarctica's ice shelves. Humanity's been trying to melt it out of there for ages. In 1998, over 1,200 human bones were found in Benjamin Franklin's house. They were used to study human anatomy, or so they say. Pablo Picasso's first painting was called El Picador, which he created at just 8 years old. It sucked. I wrote most of this script on February 29th, 2024. Happy leap year. Pope Gregory IX declared war on cats. Roman Emperor Caligula declared war on the sea. Athletes in the ancient Olympics competed completely naked to show off the guns and show off the buns. The word robot comes from the Czech word robota, meaning forced labor. The year 536 is commonly referred to as the worst year in history to be alive. A volcanic eruption in Europe farted out enough dust and debris to cause a multi-year winter. The lack of sunlight dropped average global temperatures by several degrees, causing crop failure and famine in Europe and Asia. Oh yeah, and then the plague showed up. Napoleon's horse was named Marengo. Established in the year 930, Iceland has the oldest parliament in the world. The 13th Grand Duke of Lithuania was Jogaila Algirdaitis. He was also King of Poland. According to a 2021 census, 55% of Isle of Man residents identify as Christian, 44% aren't religious at all. Abraham Lincoln was a licensed bartender. The first capital of the ancient city of Assyria was Ashur. Now you can get across the Bridge of Death.
What is the capital of Assyria?
Ashur.
Right, off you go.
The very first known written language is Sumerian, with the earliest known usage dating back to 3100 BC in Mesopotamia. The German MG42 machine gun used in World War II has a firing rate of up to 1,500 rounds per minute with an effective range of up to 2,000 meters. In the Roman Empire, a triumvir monetalis was someone who minted coins. The Great Fire of London in 1666 started in a small bakery and quickly engulfed the majority of the city for 4 days. Firefighting methods at the time were no more than buckets of water or destroying other buildings to stop the spread. In the end, 85% of the city's residents were now homeless. On the bright side, only 6 people reportedly died, so there's a spark of positivity. The Ottoman Empire was founded in 1299 and fell in 1922. At the end of World War II, Russian citizens decided to party hard. So hard, in fact, that the entire country's vodka reserves were tapped out in just 22 hours. Nostrovia. In 1973, Chinese Supreme Communist overlord Mao Zedong offered the United States 10 million Chinese women. As a joke. Instead, he ended up killing 40 to 80 million people during his totalitarian dictatorship. It was supposed to be a great leap forward, Mao. A popular fad in the 1950s was phone booth stuffing, and just like my romantic endeavors, it didn't last long. Julius Caesar was stabbed 23 times. Rich people in 19th century Europe were in harsh competition for who could collect the most unique and rare orchids. Too bad none of them pulled a Black Lotus. Alexander the Great named over 20 cities after himself during his conquering of over 2 million square miles of land by age 30. What have you done with your life? In 1953, US President Dwight Dimmadome Eisenhower was lassoed by cowboy Marty Montana on horseback during his inauguration speech. Nintendo was founded in 1889 by Fusajiro Yamauchi to produce Hanafuda playing cards. Famed philosopher Socrates didn't really like written words. He believed it was an inefficient way to communicate knowledge and that it would make people lazy and ruin their ability to use the power of memory to recall information. Thus, people would rely on text to retrieve information instead of fully understanding concepts. As a result, the stubborn asshole never wrote anything down. J.R.R. Tolkien's full name was John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. You read the Harry Potter books, right? The Laotian Civil War lasted 16 years, 6 months, 1 week, and 2 days. Despite how old you think it was, the Aztec Empire was actually founded in 1428. King Henry VIII had 4 butt-wiping servants called Grooms of the Stool. For their services, all 4 were formally knighted. At the start of World War I, the US Air Force had only 18 pilots and 12 airplanes. In ancient Asia, death by elephant was a popular execution method. Germany fully controlled 4 colonies during the scramble for Africa in the 1800s and 1900s. They included territories in modern-day Burundi, Cameroon, Namibia, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Togo. On average, Germany uncovers about 2,000 tons of unexploded bombs every year. The wealthy class in Victorian England loved making themselves as white as possible, so they would eat and bathe in arsenic to lighten their complexion. The first version of the internet, called ARPANET, began as a connection between two computers in California in 1969. It eventually branched out to multiple computers for research purposes and information sharing, forming an intercommunication network, shortened to Internetwork, and shortened more to the internet. Nowadays, you can watch someone press their feet into a webcam halfway across the world for $3.99 an hour. Or so I've heard. China was actually the first country to use paper money all the way back in the 7th century because coins were just too dang heavy for merchants to lug around all the time. Roman gladiator blood was once used as a cure for epilepsy. It didn't work. Using forks to eat food used to be considered offensive to God since he gave you hands to eat with. In the 1856 Belgian general election, Catholics won the Chamber of Representatives 63-45 against the Liberal Party. The Secretary of the Navy during the United States Civil War was Gideon Welles. He had 8 children. The first modern Olympic Games were held in Athens, Greece in 1896. The first silver medalist, gold medals didn't exist yet, was American James B. Connolly in the triple jump. Winston Churchill reportedly smoked up to 15 cigars a day. Private George Price of the Canadian Army was the last casualty of World War I. On November 11, 1918, he was hit in the chest by a sniper at 10:58 a.m. in Mons, Belgium, 2 minutes before the war officially ended. Sorry about that. The first emperor of Japan was legendary Emperor Jimmu, a claimed descendant of the sun god Amaterasu, though there is no evidence that he actually existed. Robert Liston was a British surgeon in the 1800s famous for his swift surgeries. In a time where the best anesthetics were a shot of whiskey and a stick to bite on, speed was critical to minimize pain. During his most famous surgery, Liston set a leg amputation 80% record in just 2.5 minutes flat, severing the fingers of his assistant and accidentally stabbing a nearby spectator. All 3 men died. Basketball was invented in 1891 by Canadian-American physician James Naismith. You put ball in basket. Fun. During World War II, Americans called hamburgers Liberty Steaks and sauerkraut Liberty Cabbage. The weather in Phoenix, Arizona in the US on April 20th, 1969 at around 5 p.m. was 90 degrees Fahrenheit with winds east-southeast at 8 miles per hour. The Lebanese city of Tyre was founded in 2750 BC. The first instance of income tax in the US started in 1861 to raise funds for the Civil War. Anyone making over $800, or the equivalent of $28,000 today, was taxed a flat rate of 3%. Marie Antoinette's music teacher was a German opera composer by the name of Christoph Willibald Gluck. The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time came out in November of 1998, and I'm still playing it. No witches were actually burned alive during the Salem witch trials. Instead, they were just hanged, which is quicker and doesn't smell as bad. In 1644, eating pie was banned in England. Meat pies, fruit pies, your wife's pie, all of them. Prince Louis Rwagasore of Burundi is regarded as a national hero. He led a political resistance against Belgium and demanded independence from the colonizers. He was elected second prime minister of Burundi in 1961 and served his country for 2 weeks before he was assassinated by political opponents. Burundi was granted independence from Belgium a year later. The Kingdom of Karagwe in modern-day Tanzania was disestablished in 1963. Adolf Hitler helped design the Volkswagen Beetle. A carrier pigeon named Commando successfully carried out over 90 missions during World War II. He even got a medal. The 5th leader of the Soviet Union was Leonid Brezhnev, and the guy had eyebrows for days. The 27th state added to the US was Florida. Despite humans being around for over 200,000 years, written history is only 6,000 years old, so who knows what they did? Probably hucked rocks at each other. The Industrial Revolution in the US began in 1760 and lasted all the way until 1840. The popular game Jenga experienced a lull of sales in 2001 because Jenga towers weren't the only ones to fall that year. Silk was first used in clothing back in China in 3630 BC. silky smooth. During the stock market crash of 1929, the Dow Jones Index, which tracks 30 of the biggest US companies, fell 89% when it bottomed out in the summer of 1932. It took 22 years to get back to pre-crash heights. That's why I invest responsibly. All on red. The worst jobs in history. If you ever think your job's crappy, try having to plunge into a pit of literal human doo-doo feces every single night. Way back in the day in good old England, some daring men made a career out of wading through human excrement. So-called gong farmers were tasked with draining out cesspits filled to the brim with offensive butt slop. The profession had existed for centuries, but it saw its height between the years of 1485 and 1603, also known as the Tudor period.
Oi, I got a tutor for you.
Since this was way before the invention of the Terlet, people were content with just slamming their cheeks down in a public latrine to pinch off a quick loaf. The other problem was the lack of availability of somewhere to go. Towards the end of the 14th century, it's estimated that there was only one public bathroom per 2,000 people. Plus, keep in mind that all of that human waste was just piling up in a literal stone-lined hole in the ground, so you were just dropping logs onto a mountain of timber. The local government, realizing that this horrid threat to public health was fermenting beneath everyone's feet, took action to allow the construction of private outhouses and latrines in residential areas as a way to disperse the smelly sewage. It didn't work all that well. So with dookie levels rising, help was needed to drain the pits. Enter the gong farmer. The term gong deriving from an Old English term meaning to go. They were also referred to as the much more mysterious and cooler sounding title of nightmen, as the only time that they were allowed to perform their duties was under the shroud of night, and that really sucked. There were no flashlights, spotlights, or illumination of any kind. You just had to hope that the moon was shining brightly to light your way through the filth. The nightmen would enter these cesspits and drain the contents using buckets and shovels. Excrement was loaded into barrels and carted off to be dumped near the River Thames. Don't worry, it was used as fertilizer later. Maybe. These men would be knee-deep, waist-deep, even neck-deep in the stuff, which had its own risks, the first and foremost being asphyxiation. Cesspits were often enclosed spaces with little to no ventilation, so the buildup of noxious and toxic gases was a very real threat. Although rare, a gong farmer could pass out from a lack of fresh air and drown in the waste. Another risk was poor maintenance. Cesspits were typically drained as needed, which, depending on the size of the thing, could be up to 2 years between sloppy scoops. Since these pits just sat there and rotted, it was common for stone walls to collapse in on the farmers while they harvested their crops. Any scrapes or bumps would certainly get infected, which could only lead to a painful death. But these high risks were met with high reward. Since the job was less than desirable, gong farmers made quite a healthy living, about 6 pence a day. Now, I'm not quite sure what that is in non-silly sounding money, but sounds pretty good. Problem is though, gong farmers perpetually reeked from their labors and were only permitted to live in certain areas of the city, with most of the public actively avoiding them and, well, treating them like crap. Now, if you're looking for a soul-crushing, body-breaking job that pays next to nothing, you're an idiot. But I could recommend that you apply for the occupation of chimney sweep. These services were all the rage in, you guessed it, England's Tudor period. But the job has existed for hundreds of years. Rapid urbanization led to the construction of a lot of buildings, and each one of them suckers needs a source of heat. Gotta keep them English toesies nice and warm during the miserable gray winter months until the arrival of the miserable gray summer months. So a lot of fireplaces and chimneys were built to meet that demand. You do know how a fireplace works, right? Make fire, fire make heat and smoke go up through chimney and blow out the top. But all of that burning of wood and coal creates lots of icky carbon-heavy flammable deposits that build up within the chimney. Big problem, cause if that's not properly cleared out, then things can just go, and there goes not only your house, but a few neighbors' houses as collateral damage. Well, the higher-ups didn't like the risk of their kingdom going up in smoke at any given time, so they mandated that chimneys must be swept at least 4 times a year or face heavy fines. Thus, the employment of chimney sweeps became critical. The problem, though, is that chimneys at the time weren't exactly designed for human entry and cleaning. Bugger. Most flue networks in the building were grouped together on the roof, but could have sharp turns as they angled out towards their respective fireplaces or furnaces. To make matters even worse, regulations shrunk flue sizes down to as little as 9 by 9 inches. This made it nearly impossible for full-grown men to slip through the cracks. The solution? Children. Really young children. Adorable, wide-eyed orphans were yoinked from poor houses and taken on as apprentices called climbing boys, with opportunities to one day grow into master sweepers themselves, if they lived that long. If it wasn't obvious, chimney sweeping was extremely dangerous, especially for the little limber lads. Boys as young as 6 years old were sent up chimneys and told to get scrubbing. The physical dangers were abundant, as several children had died from getting stuck or horribly burned from scaling the scalding bricks. Keep in mind that these fireplaces were almost always in use, so those chimneys were hot and ready like a carry-out pizza. Now, if the cramming didn't kill you, the scrubbing would. Soot and creosote, the organic carbonaceous byproducts of burning wood and coal, are carcinogenic. So if you're trapped in a confined space just scrub-a-dub-dubbing away while sucking up hits of cancer-causing black powder all day day, things are not going to turn out well for you. But it actually wasn't your lungs that you needed to worry about. No, it was your balls. Scrotal squamous cell carcinoma, also known as chimney sweeps carcinoma or just straight up scrotal cancer, was a death sentence. Something I didn't mention until now was that the young children, as a way to fit easier into the narrow hot chimneys, often went commando. No shirt, no shoes, no pants, but all service. The constant exposure to soot and such led to the development of tumors on their nethers. Once developed, they were lucky if they had a few years left in them. Sure, your sack is out of whack, but damn, that chimney's clean. You've probably heard of the radium girls, young women of the workforce that would paint luminous numbers and hands onto timepieces in the early 1900s. Well, this is similar. Towards the end of the 19th century, matchmaking was a pretty lucrative business. Not like pairing couples up, but making literal matches. By the late 1800s, there were about 25 matchmaking factories across Great Britain, employing over 4,000 chaps and chapettes. The process, as with most industries at the time, involved working with some nasty chemicals. The flavor of the day here was white phosphorus, an unstable compound that burned fiercely when ignited. You know, perfect for the few seconds that you would need to set something ablaze. On top of being both easily ignitable and violently reactive with oxygen, it had the triple whammy of also being extremely toxic. Of all matchmaking jobs, roughly half were involved in the direct handling of white phosphorus, with over 80% of the phosphorus fingerers being young women. These women would come to be known as matchstick girls. Day in and day out, these women were tasked with packaging the dipped matchsticks, with an entire workforce handling as many as 10 million across a 10-hour shift, meeting the demand of the 250 million matches being burned in Britain every single day. Remember that fire is what got people through the day. Need to cook? Fire. Need to keep warm? Fire. Need to see in the dark? Fire. Need to shrink your overhead? Fire. It was the biggest blessing humanity has ever discovered, and you can now summon it out of a little box in your pocket. The obvious problem is that fiddling with all of those fickle phosphorus fumes physically fucked you up. It was very common for both men and women to form phosphoric necrosis of the jaw. The condition, nicknamed Fossy jaw, developed after the long-term exposure to phosphorus fumes. Initial symptoms included simple toothaches, which evolved into complete tooth loss, abscesses, swelling of the gums, and complete necrosis of the jaw. To put it simply, your jaw rotted off. If you did get the jaw rot, there was about a 1 in 5 chance that the rest of your body would be rotting not long after from contracting an even worse condition known as death. In 1888, over 1,400 matchstick girls, fed up with this blatant disregard for their safety, decided to strike, demanding better pay, working conditions, and abolition of unfair fines and penalties. The strike lasted for 2 weeks before demands were met and accepted. 20 years later, in 1908, the British House of Commons completely banned the use of toxic white phosphorus in favor of the much safer and less toxic red phosphorus, which is what we use in matches today, but not in the match head, on the striking pad. So remember to light one up for the matchstick girls. If you think your job's exhausting, try hauling an entire freaking ship up a river with your bros. These are burlaks, or barge haulers. They hauled barges. Typically dirt poor peasants just looking for enough coin to eat for a week, these men were tasked with strapping on a strap and using whatever strength they had left in them to pull in ships from the Caspian Sea all the way up the Volga River in the days of the Russian Empire. Since ship traffic was near constant thanks to strong trade, burlaks were in high demand to carefully guide the vessels up the Volga. But why couldn't the ships just sail up the river, you might ask? Because the Volga flows outward towards the Caspian Sea, and there were rarely favorable winds to propel a ship up the river, lest you risk beaching your entire ship on the banks. So why not hire a bunch of exhausted and desperate poor people to do the work instead? Whoa, slow down fellas, there's no need for us to be Russian. Depending on the load size, burlak groups could range from just a few men up to 150 fellas pulling a single ship. But there was a moment of respite for these workers. See, one advantage to working in the Russian Empire was the cold winters. Can't exactly move ships upstream when the waterways are completely frozen over. So burlaks were seasonal, working dawn until dusk, thaw till frost. But since the combination of being poor and not working meant certain death, the men would pick up odd jobs in the winter to barely scrape by.
Hey, I make a duck. Smudge, smudge.
At the beginning of the 19th century, it is estimated that about 600,000 burlaks worked in the Russian Empire, but the evolution of ship technology and the invention of the steam-powered ship rendered the job obsolete. By the end of the 19th century, the burlak profession had vanished over the horizon. Now I know what you're thinking, so stop it. This has nothing to do with milking your own snake or giving little pinches to little snake nips, which don't exist. Snakes aren't mammals. The job of a snake milker was to extract their venom from their fangs. He looks cute, right? Think again. Snake venom was highly coveted for use in early warfare as a biological weapon, granting you the ability to proc tick damage over time to your enemies if you weren't able to finish them off yourself. Perhaps the best weapons of choice to get slathered in the stuff were arrows. Lethality of arrows varied greatly. Take one in the skull? Yeah, sure, you're dead as a doornail. But take one in a less critical spot like an arm or a leg, assuming you don't sever an artery, and you might just live to see another day. But that all goes out the window if the arrow tip was dipped in some venomous drip. Quite a few civilizations have been noted for using envenomed or poisoned arrows throughout history. You've got the Khoisan people of southern Africa who have been using poisoned arrows for thousands of years in hunting large prey, and the Harmatilians who used viper venom against an invading Alexander the Great. But no army employed the use of snake venom better than the Scythians. Also duking it out against Alexander the Great, the Scythians developed their own iconic poison for warfare, combining not only viper venom, but also putrefied human blood and excrement. Even minor scrapes from their weapons were lethal. So on top of dealing with being envenomed, you also dealt with the horrors of gangrene and tetanus. So with all that said and done, yeah, snake milkers. Like I said, it was their job to wrangle and wrestle up enough snakes to meet the demand of entire armies. But luckily, this wasn't a time for catch and release practices. Kill the snakes, take their venom. That's the job. Of course, that is easier said than done. By nature, snakes are shy little fellas and pretty hard to find. Chances are you get struck before you even noticed one. One catch of their fangs is enough for it to be game over. Snake milkers were considered lucky if they even managed to survive a single round of collecting. I think it's time for a quick science lesson. Venoms can be sorted into three main types: neurotoxic, hemotoxic, cytotoxic, yikes. Neurotoxins strike and destroy all your nerves. You're agonized and paralyzed, as you can observe. Hemotoxins target all your healthy blood, thinning down or clotting up, so now you're done for, bud. Cytotoxins focus on killing all your cells, so you can probably guess that you won't be doing well. Just avoid snakes, and you'll be doing fine. I know you fellas and fellettes just love a good rhyme. So to close this chapter out, yes, snake milkers still exist nowadays, though only for medical research and developing antivenom rather than biological warfare. Or so we think. Imagine getting ready to charge onto a battlefield to either invade a country or defend your own. You see your fellow soldiers gearing up for battle with their trusty firearms, and you're given a drum. Ugh. I got a fight. Drummers, believe it or not, were a critical part of warfare in the days of yore. Since there were no such things as radios or more instantaneous methods of communication, drummer boys were employed and trained to maintain order on the battlefield, signaling commands, attacks, retreats, and everything in between. Peaking in popularity during the American Civil War, drummer boys were typically in their teenage years or young adulthood, though some more famous drummer boys were much younger. Little Charlie King of the Union Army died in battle at the age of just 13, being the youngest casualty in the Battle of Antietam. Itty Bitty Johnny Clem ran away from home and was taken in by the Union Army as a drummer boy at the ripe old age of 9. Just a few years later, the little fella fought in the Battle of Chickamauga in 1863 at the age of 12, where he shot and killed a Confederate soldier.
What you gonna do? Shoot?
He was promoted to sergeant, eventually retiring from the United States Army in 1915 as a brigadier general. But that's a rare occurrence. In reality, it would have gone more like this. Despite what people may think, drummer boys did not lead troops into battle. That would be stupid. Instead, they would relay commands from behind soldier lines, though they were still known to be valuable targets. If you break the communication line, you break down the army. Outside of combat, drummer boys had a wealth of other responsibilities, such as carrying messages between units, assisting battlefield surgeons with amputations, carting the wounded up the field, fetching supplies, or burying the dead. They very rarely carried weapons of their own, so if they had to defend themselves in the heat of battle, they were pretty shit out of luck. If you wanted to be one of the most influential people in all of England but don't have a drop of royal blood in you, you'd want to squeeze into the role of the groom of the stool, a job requiring you to get up real close and personal with the king or queen at the time. Look, we all have to go once or 12 times a day, so someone as prestigious and important as the king is gonna need help doing so. I mean, imagine feeling the sudden urge to blow out your britches, but you have to fight through said britches to accomplish the mission. Grooms of the stool assisted the monarch with any labors regarding biological movements. This included helping the removal of clothing, preparation of the lavish and luxurious royal ship box, and the removal of the splendiferous solids, but not before their proper examination. Yeah, that's right. Grooms of the stool were not only tasked with cleaning up the royal slurry, but making sure that the passings were healthy, taking notes of any abnormalities in appearance or frequency. These notes would be passed on to the king's personal physician to diagnose any possible ailments. Well, that's not very helpful, is it? After the log was sent down the river, the groom of the stool would also assist in the cleanup effort, either by handing the king his own personal cleaning cloth, or by taking up wiping duties themselves. Now you might think that this job sucked, but it was actually highly coveted and well respected, as grooms of the stool had access to the king outside of the public eye, allowing for valuable private conversations. Commonly high-ranking nobles or politicians, grooms of the stool were known to have influence in many formal rulings, laws, or personal life. So that Anne Boleyn chick's hot, right? No. The first documented groom of the stool dates all the way back to 1495 under King Henry VII. The role continued to evolve over the years to the title of groom of the stole, though they were more so referred to as either the gentleman or gentlewoman of the bedchamber, depending on the monarch in charge, with responsibilities eventually focusing solely on the king or queen's wardrobe. The position was held for over 400 years until being formally discontinued under King Edward VII in 1901. History facts that are wrong. This is probably one of the first things we all learned about in school when discussing ancient Egypt. Tens of thousands of slaves enduring endless hours of intense, forced physical labor while barely being fed or provided with adequate water. Drop a sack of sand, chisel something at the wrong angle, devout masochist, you're getting a whipping. Well, it's all poppycock. While there were slaves, they were mainly prisoners of war or household servants who tended to their landlords, but they weren't really part of the main labor force. Instead, laborers in ancient Egypt were conscripted using the corvée duty system, a way to pay off taxes through manual labor. According to the book The Pyramid Builders of Ancient Egypt, which discusses the pyramid builders of ancient Egypt, farmers were usually pulled from their laborious crop dusting for construction work whenever the Nile went all floody during the summer months. While the snobby rich upper class folk avoided manual labor by just paying off their tax burden, them smelly poors were tasked with construction of temples, tombs, and pyramids. Laborers who worked on the pyramids, as well as other large structures way back in the ancient times, were actually well provided for. This makes sense, as having a weakened labor force due to neglect or malnourishment, it doesn't really pay great dividends. Can't exactly move giant rocks when you're completely emaciated. Small villages have been discovered built specifically for housing laborers. These sites also contain various animal bones and plentiful bread jars showing a high-quality diet. But of course, the system wasn't perfect. Thanks to some classic upper-class corruption, sometimes things didn't always go right for these laborers, but they had the power to stand their ground. Dating all the way back to 1170 BC, written evidence has been found of an artisan's strike while constructing a tomb for then-pharaoh Ramesses III. The artisans complained about a lack of promised rations and outright refused to continue their work, dropping their chisels and their hammers to march right up to the ruling class's temples to make their demands. What do we want? Food! When do we want it? Food! After chit-chatting with the local vizier, the workers were able to secure the rations and continued their work. Now don't get me wrong, the labor that these guys endured was backbreaking, extremely strenuous, and downright exhausting, but they weren't outright enslaved or mistreated, as historians previously thought. We've all heard the legends about King Tut's tomb, right? If you disturb an ancient king's burial grounds, you'll be cursed, doomed to die a horrible death. Well, it's not so. You'd probably cough a bit from inhaling millennia-old mummy powder, but that's about it. Now, there has been evidence of some ancient tombs inscribed with curse-like carvings. For example, ancient warlord and Egyptian noble Ankh-Tifi wrote that, quote, "Any ruler who shall do evil or wickedness to his coffin, may the gods not accept any goods he offers, and may his heir never inherit." Similarly, an inscription on the tomb of 10th century BC ruler Kentika Ikeki warns that any impure men who enter this tomb, there will be judgment. An end shall be made for him. I shall seize his neck like a bird, and I shall cast the fear of myself into him. Now, in a culture that was super superstitious, anyone coming across warnings like that would be like, "Oh shit! A ghost!" prompting them to 180 right out of the room. When King Tut's tomb was discovered in 1922, no such written reprimands or warnings were ever found. In reality, the rumor of King Tut's curse revolves around one George Edward Stanhope Molyneux Herbert, 5th Earl of Carnarvon, a rich English white dude who funded the whole expedition that led to the discovery of the Sandy sarcophagus. He died a whole 4 months after the opening of the tomb. After which a journalist did what journalists do and printed a whole bunch of sensationalized fake news, attributing Lord Carnarvon's death to an inexplicable curse. To no surprise, the media ran with it, making claims of a written curse being uncovered with the tomb, though this never happened. So how did Lord Carnarvon die? He done got bit by a mosquito. The resulting bump was accidentally slashed while he was shaving, making a pretty nasty cut that later got infected. The old chap died of blood poisoning at the age of 56. Dedicated believers have tried to attribute other deaths to the curse, but they're really grasping for straws. Of the 58 people who were present at the opening of the tomb, only 8 had died within a dozen years of the discovery, and by various means ranging from cancer to murder to natural causes. The majority of the men went to live on full, healthy lives. At least they didn't steal any spooky slabs. That might have been a different story. When you think of Spartans, you probably think about them slippery, shiny hunks of warrior man meat as portrayed on the silver screen. A society of strict and viciously trained bloodthirsty warriors who could decimate any opposing army. But while you're thinking about oiled up, shirtless, muscular men, you might question if this portrayal is historically accurate. It's not. In reality, the Greek city-state of Sparta had no professional army. Although growing up with militaristic training, the purpose was not to create warriors, but perfected, hardened, and respectable citizens who could serve to defend their homeland if need be. That little element of perfection is where some rumors of Spartan eugenics come in. It is believed that ancient Spartans practiced infanticide, the act of killing deformed or undesired babies as a way to strengthen the Spartan society. However, the biggest downfall of this myth is that there's only one historical source that alludes to this barbaric practice, and it's this guy, Roman historian Plutarch. He wrote that Spartan elders would examine newborns for imperfections or weaknesses. Good, bad, good. What the?
Hello, Daddy.
Ew. If any were ever found, they would just yeetus the fetus off the Taygetus mountainside. This ensured that only the best of the best would be able to thrive to crushing adulthood. But this bit of literature is almost certainly a bunch of baloney. While historians can't confirm with 100% certainty, they can confirm with 99.9% certainty that this just flat out never happened. Excavations around the proposed baby-hucking sites have failed to present any supporting evidence. There have been a few adult remains discovered, but no teeny-tiny toddler tibias were ever among them. If you needed more convincing, Plutarch's writings date some 600 years after the height of Spartan civilization, so it might have just been some silly Spartan slander. That would be like if future archaeologists in the year 4000 unearthed fanfiction from today about how medieval Europeans would just shit their britches to ward off witches. Sure, it's questionable, but you could kind of see that happening, right? Despite what you may think, death was not the goal of gladiator battles in the Roman Colosseum. If it was, Rome would have run out of them real quick. Now keep in mind that the Colosseum was active for over 400 years, hosting a plethora of different events ranging from gladiator battles to public criminal executions to full-fledged naval battle reenactments with the entire Colosseum being flooded. Pretty wild, right? Well, gladiator battles were basically the equivalent of today's UFC or boxing matches, just with swords and spears instead of fists. These fights were spectacles of sport, and the gladiators were the athletes. You had some super famous gladiators, rookie gladiators, and everything in between. While some gladiators were slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war fighting for their chance of freedom, most of the big old brutes fought for fame and fortune, or just the high-octane dopamine rush of being able to legally stab someone in the kidney and getting praised for it. Roman citizens were hyped to watch two dudes duke it out in a sweaty, sandy, sassy struggle of strength. But things were a lot more exciting than just the vanilla missionary position 9-to-5 white picket fence 1.5 children-ass sword and shield type gladiators. Nope. Actually, there were about 30 different types of gladiators ready to clang and bang away at each other. You had your dual-wielding Demochirus, the trident-chucking Retiarius, the silly-looking Caesar, and the alls-out, balls-out Cestus, among other DLC characters. So imagine that you're living your boring Roman life, sitting in your boring Roman house, scratching your boring Roman balls when you suddenly catch wind of the gladiator battle of the century. Two andabate pitted against each other. You'd lose your shit. Why would you lose your shit? Because andabate were condemned criminals fighting each other completely blind. Yeah, as a form of punishment, two criminals equipped with nothing more than a sealed helmet and a rusty sword were dumped out into the arena and forced to square off. It's like watching two blindfolded kids trying to whack at a piñata, except they're both potential piñatas. Now, while formal gladiator duels were not to the death, of course some still died, but it was more common to die by bleeding out after the match had been called by the referee. Oh yeah, they had referees. These were often retired gladiators tasked with making sure that the rules of battle were being followed and stopping fights before final blows were dealt. You see, gladiators were expensive investments, so their managers wanted them alive for as long as possible, lest they start all over leveling up another rookie from scratch. So with all that being said, professional gladiator battles were not performed for the sake of death, just for the thrill of the fight, and the potential of death. Ancient myths are tough for modern historians to interpret, as historical writers across time have their own biases. Depending on how they felt about a certain historical figure, they could cement their legacy in history as a smart fella or a fart smella. The prevailing myth that Roman Emperor Nero diddled his fiddle as Rome burned to the ground is one that should go up in smoke. It's commonly believed that Nero, having descended into madness over the course of his reign, started the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, a disastrous and destructive inferno that destroyed nearly 3/4 of the Roman capital. Accusations claim that Nero didn't really like the look of Rome and wanted to rebuild it in his own vision with a lavish and gaudy golden palace, so a conveniently timed fire would have been a great opportunity to do so. The fire is suspected to have started in a shopping district stockpiled with flammable goods. Once the fire started, it was nearly impossible to contain. Rome was a dense city, streets were narrow, housing structures were wooden, and the wind was a-blowin'. This set of conditions provided the perfect environment for the big ol' fire to really roar. The blaze lasted for 9 whole days, decimating 10 of Rome's 14 districts. But was Emperor Nero to blame? Not at all. According to Tacitus, one of the most influential Roman historians at the time, Nero was not near Rome when the fire started. He was actually several miles away in the coastal town of Antium, but he rushed back home to Rome once he caught wind of the disaster. When he did get back, Nero actually funded relief efforts and opened up private gardens and other structures for shelter to those affected. Despite these efforts, Nero still came under scrutiny from the nobles who hated him, claiming that he should have responded sooner and provided more assistance.
Freaking Nero, dude. I bet my scorched ass cheeks he started that fire himself.
Yeah, you're right, he probably did.
Guys, he was literally miles away in another city.
What did you do?
And that's how rumors start. In actual fact, there is no historical evidence that Nero started the fire, and especially no evidence that he played the fiddle when Rome burned. Mostly because the fiddle wouldn't be invented for another 900 years. It's probable that the claim is part of Christian propaganda, as Nero famously blamed them for the fire, leading to their persecution. So who really got the last laugh? It was Nero. He burned a lot of Christians. It's possible that your middle school history textbooks may have toyed with the idea that ancient Aztecs, or even the greater Mexica people as a whole, saw the invading Spanish conquistadors as godlike figures. More specifically, history has suggested that the Aztec ruler Moctezuma, or Montezuma, however you want to pronounce it, believed that the arrival of the Spanish coincided with the prophesied return of Quetzalcoatl, the Mesoamerican feathered serpent god of creation. But we now know that it's all, as the Spanish say, a bunch of caca. It's certainly true that the native Mexican people were stunned and confused by the appearance of the foreign invaders with their fancy horses, gunpowder, and white skin, but there's no evidence explicitly stating that they were thought of as gods. Letters written by Hernan Cortés himself about his conquests never mention being mistaken for or being interpreted as a god in any way, shape, or form. And this is further supported by the writings of Spanish conquistador Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who chronicled Cortez's conquests in real time. One passage highlights a conversation between Cortez and Moctezuma in the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. Conversation basically had Moctezuma being like, yeah, people around here think I'm a god, that I'm all about gold and silver and precious stones, but look, you see that? Flesh and blood, my dude. We're both the same. I know that you're just a bunch of foreigners and not some otherworldly divine beings. That would just be silly. To which Cortez replied, so where did this idea come from? Well, it actually started to surface decades after the Aztecs were conquered. Publications of Spanish conquests alluded to the idea that Cortez and his men tried to pass their weapons off as magic and their horses off as intelligent, aggressive beasts. So it was mainly a sensationalized retelling of events, portraying the Mexica people as more feeble-minded, all while embellishing the Spanish image. As it turns out, the Aztec weren't bamboozled by some distrustful deity. The Spanish completely steamrolled the Aztec with the help of guns, alliances to Aztec rivals, and every European explorer's iconic weapon, disease. It was less, oh my god, and more, oh my god! The Great Depression was truly a financial disaster, not only for the US, but for the entire globe. Most of you out there might recall learning that the stock market crash of 1929 caused the Great Depression, but in reality, it was just the signal that shit had hit the financial fan. Nothing more than a devastating effect from a much more threatening underlying cause. If you're unaware, the world economy is a constant struggle for balance of supply and demand, with price being the end result. Lots of demand and no supply, prices go up. Lots of supply but no buyers, prices go down. Sure, that's a bit oversimplified, but you get the idea. The Great Depression was a catastrophic chain of events stemming from US overproduction of goods. You see, in the early 1920s, the world had entered a time of peace at the end of World War I. This led to an industrial boom. Not for war machines, but for consumer goods. Mass production was going wild, and factories were farting out new products like crazy. To sell these products, companies began aggressive advertising campaigns. The news, radio, magazines, and everything just screamed in your face to buy the latest and greatest doohickey. And the people did. But how could customers afford all of this lavish spending? Yup, the establishment of consumer credit. Cars, appliances, clothes, homes, all purchased on credit. But the United States was not the only beneficiary of a peacetime economy. European and Asian markets began producing their own goods, selling these products to the US for cheaper prices, which caught the eyes of consumers looking to save a few pennies here and there. The big American companies, seeing potential profits leaving their grubby hands, were pissed and lobbied Congress to protect their interests. In order to do so, the Fordney-McCumber Tariff of 1922 was passed. This raised American tariffs across the board, increasing the consumer cost of foreign goods as to thin out the competition and force Americans to buy American products. Europe and Asia promptly responded in kind, and soon a tariff war commenced. All this sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? Now, in order to keep a super long story super short, here's what happened next. Demand shrank as American companies and farms overproduced their goods. Too much stuff and no one to buy it means less sales. Less sales means less profit for these companies, and with less company profit, that means they're gonna start handing out some pink slips. With lots of people laid off, lots of people have less money to spend, so companies lose even more money, and if they lose enough of it, they go bankrupt. Now, when companies went bankrupt, at least back in the 1920s, the banks that supported them failed. And when the banks failed, people's money straight up vanished, thanks to the lack of FDIC insurance. Everyone loses their shit and rushes to withdraw money from whatever banks are still standing, but there's not enough physical cash to meet that demand. Now, all of a sudden, no one has money. So what happened to it all? The banks lent it out to all the rich people, placing speculative bets on the stock market. Now, when there's a lot of market speculation, stock market prices get unreasonably high. Unreasonably high prices aren't very sexy, so no one else wants to buy them. Instead, they sell to take profits. But when these profits are taken, that stock price drops. When stock prices drop, any remaining shareholders lose potential profit, which is no bueno, so they panic sell whatever shares they have. And when there's enough seller momentum across the board, the entire stock market crashes. So banks have failed, blue-collar workers have lost their life savings overnight, millionaires have lost their fortunes, factories have folded, and farmers have hung up their tools. Not only did this cripple the United States, but the entirety of global trade. The United States could not meet critical export demands, and foreign economies selling raw materials such as sugar, rubber, and lumber lost their biggest customer, and thus most of their money, impacting their economies. The Great Depression was without doubt one of the worst economic disasters of the modern age. The American economy struggled until the United States entered World War II in 1941, where demand for production and labor picked right back up. To put it simply, the 1929 stock market crash did not cause the Great Depression. It was the writing on the wall that the system was breaking. Afterward, the banking system was overhauled and the stock market heavily regulated to prevent history from repeating itself. And we'll see how that goes. Something bad about every country, in no particular order. Sri Lanka's economy has been collapsing since 2019 thanks to a corrupt government and the evaporation of tourism because of the Big C. They owe about $51 billion to the world and only have about $25 million in the bank. Uganda has a terrible water supply thanks to being landlocked and a weirdly booming population. I bet the government will probably help out, but they're probably just waiting for the next Mr. Beast video to drop. Besides being an F-tier apex gun, Mozambique has one of the highest birth rates, but also one of the lowest life expectancies at birth. Good luck, son. If you have such bad judgment that you find yourself in Honduras, try not to get sick as they only have one doctor per 3,000 people. Take the economic approach and just be mugged and left for dead. Freedom of speech and freedom of the press are still restricted in the UAE. Hold anti-government protests like we do in the US and you'll get stoned, not the good kind. Iceland has committed some of the worst political atrocities in history, from purchasing green beans to shooting protected ducks and even making rude comments. Over 90% of Gabon is covered in rainforest. The other 10% is covered in AIDS and malaria. When 18th century Serbian villagers experienced anything inexplicably spooky, they blamed the recently deceased, dug them up, and killed them all over again. They would call these bodies vampires. The entire country of Lesotho is more than 3,200 feet above sea level, which is pretty high, but not as high as having the world's highest self-deathing rate. Paraguay once lost a war against Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay in the late 1800s. They then doubled down and kept fighting, only to lose over 2/3 of its population in the end. For over 500 years, the tiny island nation of Mauritius traded hands between the Dutch, French, and British, and they all dealt in heavy slave trade. Eswatini is the last absolute monarchy in Africa. Too bad it's still a dirt poor third world country. For over a decade, Haiti accounted for over 30% of the Atlantic slave trade, importing 40,000 slaves a year at its height, but then they revolted and won independence. Israel is a huge fan of huge walls, and not a huge fan of neighbors, but not calling out any in particular. Djibouti is one of the funniest named countries in the world. It's also one of the largest destinations for human trafficking. A little less funny now, isn't it? You think the Netherlands looks like this, but it actually looks more like this. Montenegro translates to Black Mountain, and is in fact not a reference to your friend Monte. Translating to the savior, it's exactly what El Salvador needs since it has been ranked as having the highest murder rate in the world. 68% of Tanzania's population lived below the poverty line of $1.25 a day. Minimalist YouTubers should take notes. Liechtenstein was the last European country to allow women to vote, in 1984. Nicaragua has no formal address system, so if you're trying to go anywhere, an address will probably look like third house down from the second left turn after the Taco Bell. Good luck, Amazon drivers. Sweden was a mighty empire in the late 1500s, but then they tried invading Poland. That no one has ever successfully invaded Poland. Sweden was no longer a mighty empire after that little stunt. Belize has a Bigfoot equivalent called El Sisamito, which runs around killing hunters and ripping off their thumbs. The country of Chad has a mad sharp jawline. It also has one of the highest mother mortality rates in the world. Malawi's president once sold off a private jet and 35 Mercedes-Benz to raise money for the country's economy. Too bad it has the third poorest economy in the world. Burkina Faso is an African country with the capital of Ouagadougou, which just sounds like it was founded by Adam Sandler. In ancient Italy, the Roman Empire was at its peak in the year 117 AD, or CE. or whatever. It then did a 360 and fell over in the year 476. The last traces of the Roman Empire can be found across many middle-income shopping areas in the US. Seychelles by the seashore. Even though it's regarded as the Garden of Eden, it's plagued with terrible plastics pollution. Their saving grace is that their iconic sea coconuts are making me act up something awful. In 2011, Malta held a record for most people gathered dressed as storybook characters at 453, but then was obliterated by Singapore with 1,560 in 2014. Clearly, neither country has ever heard of or smelled a Comic-Con. Mali was home to the world's richest king, Mansa Musa. Now, it's home to the world's largest mud building. Colombia boasts a thriving coffee export, but they also dunk cheese in said coffee and sell you donkey porn on the side of the road. Take your pick. It already sucks enough being a journalist in general, but especially in Eritrea, where it is ranked last in press freedom in the entire world. Tuvalu is a tiny group of islands northeast of Australia with an area of just 10 square miles. Almost no one goes there, so who cares? Give it up for Tuvalu, everybody. Liberia had a crazy civil war from 1989 to 2003. Over 250,000 lives were lost, with most of the killing performed by child soldiers. Imagine getting 360 no-scoped by a 4-year-old, but IRL. Funerals in the Dominican Republic last a total of 9 days. 3 days of grief, 3 days of silence and reflection, and 3 days of acceptance. Just huck 'em in the ground and move on already. It is considered very rude to refuse food or drink in Ukraine. Be sure to take seconds or thirds of all the food that the US is paying for. In 1847, a quarter of Ireland's population kicked the Guinness-soaked bucket due to the infamous Irish potato famine. Potatoes rotted and the British government was neglectful as usual. 1 million people died. You know how it is. Denmark is home to some great social welfare programs and a strong education system. Too bad you gotta pay over 50% in taxes for it. The early 1600s was the darkest time in Russia's history, where a famine killed off a third of its population and then a war killed off another half of that. Good thing Russia's peaceful nowadays, at least. Bhutan used to be in complete isolation until the 1970s, banning any foreigners from entering it. Not that you could really get in anyway, considering it's just friggin' steep-ass mountains everywhere. I won't go into detail about Greece. Pause the video here and look this up. Just don't use a work computer. Bangladesh's capital city of Dhaka is ranked one of the worst cities to live in because of insufferable traffic, pollution, and density. Just like any other city, I guess. Guatemala was home to the longest Latin American civil war in history, lasting 36 years and resulting in 200,000 people getting Guatemala'd to death. Tragically, there are no guinea pigs in Guinea. It actually really pisses me off. North Macedonia used to just be Macedonia, but Greece bullied them into changing the name because a part of Greece is also called Macedonia. I don't know, man. Tunisia has some of the world's most beautiful golden beaches. It also has some of the highest domestic abuse rates. When Fidel Castro took control of Cuba, he destroyed and banned all games of Monopoly. Reports of family arguments plummeted overnight. Zimbabwe's economy went through the ringer beginning in 2005. The government printed a $100 trillion bill. In reality, it was only worth about 40 cents. Give it up for inflation. Austria's main exports are automobiles, paper products, and genocidal dictators. So when Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492, he really landed in the Bahamas. He also enslaved almost all of the locals over the next 30 years. Costa Rica is home to a mythical demon monkey called La Mona, which screams at you from the treetops. Before he was president, JFK was marooned on one of the 992 Solomon Islands. He was later rescued by locals only to be murdered by his own government. The island was later named Kennedy Island. China is... But I gotta say, he does look like him. St. Vincent and the Grenadines sounds like the name of a shitty band. In reality, it's just a group of shitty Caribbean islands. I guarantee no one from Burundi will see this video because only 3% of its population has internet access. It's ranked as the poorest country in the world. Comment below if you're from Burundi. Turkmenistan is home to the Gates of Hell, a natural gas crater that has been burning since the 1980s. Probably why it's one of the least visited countries in the world. Cameroon is home to over 2,000 different ethnic groups and almost zero rights for women. The buttholes in Nepal decided to be the only country in the world to not have a rectangular flag, but I guess that makes sense for a country that still uses the caste system. The country of Panama prioritizes use of freshwater reserves for the needs of the Panama Canal rather than the needs of farmers. You can't eat boats, fellas. Or can you? In 1800s Portugal, Diogo Alves killed a total of 76 people by pushing them off of a 200-foot ledge over the Aguas Libres aqueduct. He was caught and sentenced to death by hanging in 1840. Côte d'Ivoire, also called the Ivory Coast, is the world's largest producer of cocoa beans through child slave labor. Aww. You can taste the sweat and tears in every bite. Yeah, Borat's homeland of Kazakhstan is a real country. Here, you can play the ancient game of Kokpar, where two men fight over a headless goat corpse on horseback. Real fun stuff. Being a nation of islands, the Maldives will be one of the first to get wiped out when sea levels eventually rise. But look at the turtles! Dominica's economy heavily relies on agriculture. This wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for all the hurricanes that just outright obliterate crops annually. One of the most popular and rapidly growing internet communication platforms was founded in Estonia. That's right, Skype. Everyone uses Skype. In 1991, Mount Pinatubo erupted in the Philippines, sending 10 billion metric tons of magma into the air and shifting global temperatures by 1 degree. But I have to use a paper straw, right? St. Kitts and Nevis was almost always home to tobacco and sugar plantation slaves until it was abolished in 1834. Oh yeah, and Alexander Hamilton was born here. In Oman, you're not allowed to spend more than 10% of your monthly earnings on alcohol, so when you try and fail, you'll be standing there like, oh man. Some Malayan citizens visit graveyards at night, providing offerings to the dead in hopes of receiving winning lottery numbers. Syria is home to some of humanity's oldest structures in the world. Some of these remains and ruins have survived over 7,000 years, only to get blown up by extremist groups. World-famous Grammy Award-winning singer Angelique Kidjo was born in Benin. Oh, you never heard of her? Yeah, me neither. St. Lucia apparently has a pretty bad police brutality problem, so best avoid going there if you want to commit crimes. You probably just get what you deserve. Nauru is another one of them tiny island nations like Tuvalu. Although it's so tiny, it is the fattest nation in the world with 88.5% of its adult population classified as obese. They've also never won an Olympic gold medal. I wonder why. Turkey has some strange customs with babies, from covering newborns in salt in order to give them resistance bonuses to placing a turtle under their pillows at night for protection. Muslims in Brunei are forbidden from marrying outside of their own religion. It's a crime punishable by death. I do, more like I die. Anyway, it's a holiday in Cambodia. It's tough, kid, but it's life. It's a holiday in Cambodia. Don't forget to pack a wife. Madagascar supplies 80% of the world's vanilla. Unfortunately, there are no talking animals like certain movies would have you believe. If you're a bad boy or girl, you can still be legally executed by firing squad in Indonesia. So think twice before you commit murder or decide to go into drug trafficking while touring the country. Palestine is the main reason why Israel is such a huge fan of walls. Also, people have been telling me about a free Palestine, but for the life of me, I can't find where to claim it. Micronesia is a slightly smaller Nesia than Indonesia. It's not uncommon for school children to be kidnapped in Nigeria. Since 2020, over 1,000 students have been abducted and held for ransom. At least it's a good excuse for not doing your homework. Yemen is home to the Well of Hell, a sinkhole that local legends claim is home to a head-stealing jinn. Turns out it's just home to snakes, crocodiles, but no Robin Williams genie. On average, each Luxembourg citizen over 15 years old smokes over 6,300 cigarettes a year. And they're only the world's second heaviest smokers, right behind Andorra. North Korea is best Korea. South Africa is home to a bunch of bums because it currently has the highest unemployment rate in the world at 29.8%. For comparison, the US rate is 3.7% as of this video. Mexico. America's pants. Stay in the tourist areas or the next time your family sees you will be in a live leak video. In 2018, Venezuela experienced a 65,000% inflation rate. $1 is about 3.6 million Venezuelan bolivares. Bahrain is home to the world's largest underwater theme park. The downside? Not a single water slide. Just a big dumb plane to explore. You can't fly that thing down there. Senegal was once the largest slave trading center on the African coast from the 15th to 19th centuries, and as such is one of the biggest cases of friendly fire in history. Jamaica is a very superstitious country. There's all kinds of local legends ranging from ghosts that steal your voice to an enraged flaming bull that chases you for being out late at night. Germany. Uruguay has been consistently rated as the safest country in South America in terms of violent crimes, but that also means that it's the most expensive to live in. Safety comes with a price. Bolivia was home to the greatest lake in the world, Lake Pupo. Tragically, it has fallen victim to climate change and completely dried up. Is driving your gas-guzzling car worth the loss of Lake Pupo? I think not. Moldova is Europe's poorest country. With an average GDP per capita of only $4,551, it's no wonder why all of their smart, hardworking youngings are fleeing the country for better opportunities. If you plan on proposing to a loved one, try not to purchase a blood diamond from Sierra Leone. It could end up costing someone an arm and a leg. The previous leader of Suriname, Desi Bouterse, was the military commander during a coup in the 1980s. He was arrested for drug trafficking, served 11 years, and was then elected president for 10 years before being subsequently arrested again for murdering 15 political opponents. He's a real one. Alright guys, we're about halfway through. I hope you're remembering to stay hydrated. If not, here's your water break. Alright, that's enough. Lebanon has a crazy garbage crisis that makes even Los Angeles look sterile by comparison. Environmentalists have tried different cleanups, but the crisis remains, well, a crisis. For example, in this image alone, you can see all of my online gaming teammates. Despite being a group of islands, Cape Verde is one of the driest countries in Africa. In the 20th century, severe droughts and famine caused the death of 200,000 people. Rwanda. If you're in your 20s, you probably remember learning about the Rwanda genocide at school. In 1994, nearly 1 million people were slaughtered during the Rwandan Civil War. The only reason you know the capital of Thailand is because your friend punched you in the balls shortly after telling you. Somalians are huge fans of pasta, thanks to years of colonization by Italy. Australia is home to over 2,400 species of spider. Arachnophobes? Stay away. In 1997, Ecuador had their first female president, Rosalia Arteaga. Before being forced to resign, she served her country for 2 whole days. Singapore has some crazy laws. Here's a few of them. Walk around your house naked, chew gum, smoke, steal Wi-Fi, sing in public, feed pigeons, not flush a toilet, urinate in public, drink alcohol after 10 p.m., or be gay. It's also illegal to unalive yourself, though I'm not sure how they'd arrest you for that. If you want to name your child in Hungary, you're restricted to a list of approved names. Instead of torturing your child with a dumb name, you can instead grant your child a meaningful name such as Zev or Nolifer or Nurbanu or even Tablachka. Over the past 20 years, Trinidad and Tobago have seen an exponential rise in violent crimes, mostly against women. Come on guys, beat your meat, not a woman. In 1983, Sudan enforced Sharia law, subsequently banning all alcohol. The entire country's alcohol stock was dumped into the Nile River, so at least the crocodiles got lit. The national dish of Peru is called koi. It's just a whole roasted guinea pig. Saudi Arabia is one of the world's top executioners, performing 196 public executions in 2022, right behind Iran's 576 and China's unknown thousands. Azerbaijan is known as the land of fire because of frequent spontaneously combusting mountainside natural gas leaks. The Marshall Islands got completely dunked on when serving as a nuclear bomb test site in the 40s and 50s. The islands are riddled with bomb blast buttholes. The Central African Republic has been a complete shit show ever since gaining independence in 1960. Constant coups, internal conflict, and the like make this country a no-go. Antigua and Barbuda are 2 more dumbass islands among other dumbass islands in the dumb shit Caribbean, meaning it probably had slaves and was visited by pirates at some point. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, like most African countries, doesn't have a pretty past. The entire population was violently enslaved under the Belgian crown to farm and harvest rubber from trees. Africa really got the short end of the stick in history. There's a lot of things you're not allowed to bring into Uzbekistan. This includes, but is definitely not limited to, Monaco is the wealthiest country in the world with over 30% of its population being millionaires. Sounds impressive until you realize that the entire country can fit in Central Park in New York with a population of 38,000 people. There are at least 1.5 million cats that live in Cyprus, which means they way outnumber the amount of people. This is actually not a negative fact, unless you're allergic to cats. You're completely SOL if you have a toothache in Morocco. There's only 1 dentist for every 800,000 residents. Sounds like it's time to break out the pliers and do it yourself. Besides being the best country in the world, the United States is also the greatest country in the world. Togo is an African country. I'll give you a wild guess what thing might have happened there. If you're a masochist, you can voluntarily spend the night in the Karasta prison hotel in Latvia, where you can be interrogated, punished, and harassed as you sleep in a cold cell. Niger was the country you were terrified to pronounce at school, while some other kids were oddly excited to. Angola, African country. Slaves. Guyana was home to Jonestown, a lovely little town which had a sudden population decrease from 918 to 0 in a matter of a few hours. They drank the Flavor Aid and committed self-die in the name of Christian socialism. Vanuatu is a group of South Pacific islands, huge fans of cannibalism, with the last known case occurring in 1969. According to Vanuatu cooking practices, humans take 3 to 5 hours to cook. Still no guinea pigs in Guinea-Bissau, just citizens living off of less than $2 a day. Slovakia is home to the world's tallest cave column, which spans 112 feet high. How boring of a country do you have to be where this is a notable fact? If you want to learn about Samoa, you first have to consider the coconut and consider its tree. Also take into consideration Samoa's high obesity and heart disease rate. In New Zealand, sheep outnumber people 7-1. Be cautious. You never know when you're being watched by a sheep. Bosnia and Herzegovina is a single country but sucks as much as two. It's got some of the worst air pollution in Europe, high unemployment, and over 200,000 active landmines in walkable areas. The only thing booming here are your legs. We all know South Korea is the better Korea. I could watch those Korean street food videos all the time. Oh wait, something bad. In general, they're pretty racist towards outsiders. Because of this, South Korea is one of the least diverse countries in the world. There's a town in Mongolia named after you. Sadly, it's pronounced maroon, but that ruins the joke. Libya used to have the world's most boring flag. Then after overthrowing its dictator, they added some pizzazz with the symbol from Link's mirror shield for some reason. Must be huge Ocarina of Time fans. Barbados. Caribbean island, let's see. Pirates and slaves. Oh yes, but white slaves too. Enemies of the British Crown were sometimes sent to Barbados to live as indentured servants. The Czech Republic and Slovakia used to be Czechoslovakia but got divorced in 1993 to find new identities for themselves, leaving behind 15 million disgruntled children. If you ever visit the tiny island nation of Palau, you are required to sign an eco-pledge promising to be a good little boy or girl and not to cram straws directly down a leatherback sea turtle's gullet. Qatar hosted the 2022 World Cup. It cost the country $220 billion and 6,500 migrant workers' lives. All that to host one of the most boring sports in the world. East Timor, or Timor-Leste, declared independence from Portugal in 1975. It was then invaded by Indonesia 9 days later and sustained a 24-year period of violence and resistance, resulting in the death of over 250,000 people, or a third of the country's population. The Caribbean island nation of Grenada was invaded by the US in 1983 to stop Cuban influence and rescue US students who were studying on the island. The Comoros Islands off the coast of Africa have experienced over 20 coups since its independence from France in 1975. Speaking of France, you can get legally married to a dead person there. The practice of necrogamy was started back in 1803 as a way for women to marry their fallen soldier boyfriends. This allowed the weeping widows to become a beneficiary of their dearly departed's military pension. This way, both husband and wife end up getting the bag. In 2004, the monarchy of Tonga sued their court jester, Jesse Bogdanoff, a Bank of America financial advisor, for mismanaging over $14 million of the king's money on bad investments. Something Wall Street Bets joke. Brazil had a record-breaking 59,000 murders in 2017, with only 8% of them resulting in any legal consequence. Ethiopia is home to the cruelest place on earth, the Danakil Depression, which is the country's lowest and hottest region. But don't try to cool off in these pools. They are highly acidic water pools rich in salt, sulfur, and iron, so you'll just end up turning into soup. Although Croatia is stunningly gorgeous, it has the worst waste management system in Europe. Countries in the European Union recycle roughly 40% of their waste on average. Croatia is in the dumps at just 8%. Finland recently changed its Air Force insignia. Now it looks like this, but back when it was founded in 1918, it looked like this. Keep in mind that the swastika is an ancient symbol of good luck used across many different cultures, until some German buttholes tarnished the image. In Arabic, Iraq means fertile. Yeah. In India, more people have mobile phones than access to a toilet, so be sure to watch where you step. Since 1389, Armenians have experienced 17 different massacres, with the Armenian genocide of 1915 being the worst, resulting in around 1.2 million Armenian deaths. Tour guides in Tajikistan used to scam tourists by charging them for Yeti sighting tours in remote valleys, though no Yetis were ever found. Papua New Guinea? No son, no Guinea here, just people practicing black magic. 50 to 150 witches are executed each year. Spooky. Ladies, do your best to avoid Afghanistan as it's ranked worst in the world for gender equality. While there's no female heroes, 90% of the world's heroin is produced here. Although Zambia is home to some of Africa's most beautiful landscapes, the city of Kabwe is one of the world's most polluted cities, stemming from decades of lead mining and smelting. Over 100,000 people have reportedly suffered from lead poisoning around the town. Ghana, another African country, more slavery, but the first to gain independence from colonists. Slaves broke their backs for centuries in Egypt so that we could have the absolute banger that is the Prince of Egypt. In Kuwait, you can bet on camel racing. Oh, that isn't surprising? Well, how about camels controlled by robots? Yeah, much more interesting now, isn't it? Robots are really taking all of the jobs. Not just a state in the US, the country of Georgia slopped out the tyrannical maniac Joseph Stalin. Something that not many Georgians are proud of. Meet Chatletics, my Mauritania-locked ultimate Iron Man. Oh, wrong Mauritania. If you speak out against Gambia's corrupt government, you might find yourself kidnapped and thrown in a pit. Talk shit, get the pit. Kiribati is a group of Pacific islands. With a mean elevation of just 6 feet above sea level, it'll probably become one of the first victims of climate change. Spain is home to a plethora of nudist beaches, which sounds great in theory, until you see the people that actually go to these nudist beaches. Greenland is the perfect place if you hate neighbors, since it's the least densely populated country in the world with only 5 people per 100 square miles. Kyrgyzstan is just mountains, so I hope you like mountains. Sadly, there's still no guinea pigs, even in Equatorial Guinea. It's for the best though, cause they would probably just have to submit to the brutal authoritarian government. The Vatican City is the smallest country in the world, even though it's just a city. The Pope lives there, and that's bad enough. Although, it's gotta be said, it would make a pretty sweet GTA map. Iran experienced an unprecedented socio-economic surge thanks to the White Revolution in the 1960s and 1970s. Free education, increased healthcare, extreme distribution of wealth to the working class, infrastructure reform, expansion of women's rights, and so much more. It just sucks that all of the religious nuts took over and turned it into the less than ideal place it is today. Iran absolutely fumbled the bag on this one. Canada is America's hat, and boy do they love clubbing seals to death. Chile was home to Augusto Pinochet, one of the world's bloodiest dictators. He took power in 1973 and kidnapped, tortured, and killed thousands. But since it was in the name of fighting communism, world leaders were just like, Slovenia. It's boring as shit. The Republic of the Congo is not the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In fact, it is 100% less democratic, but has the same amount of Ebola. If you didn't have malaria upon entering Kenya, you probably do now. Laos is considered the most bombed country in the world after the US dropped over 270 million cluster bombs during the secret war in the 60s and 70s. Over 80 million remain on the ground, still active. South Sudan. It's like Sudan but with a cowboy hat. Lithuania was once a world superpower, until it got top rope elbow dropped by Russia in 1655 and finished off by plague and famine. Now Lithuania just chills. Norway is home to many beautiful animals, like whales. Oh yeah, Norway leads the world in whaling. San Marino is a tiny country state in Italy. However, there's not a single Olive Garden to be seen. Guess what? There's guinea pigs in Argentina. While in Pakistan, try not to express any non-Muslim religious beliefs, or else you might catch yourself in prison on blasphemy charges. Religious freedom ain't too good there. The people of Belarus are pretty superstitious. For example, don't whistle in someone's house or you'll blow all of their money away. To mark the end of winter, the people of Poland burn and drown a doll of Marsana, the Slavic goddess of winter and death. The African country of Botswana is 70% desert, 5% elephants, and 25% AIDS. The small African islands of Sao Tome and Principe are major transit points for heroin trafficking. Consisting of mostly desert, only 0.9% of Namibia's land is able to be used for farming, so they have to rely on imports to feed the population. Romania is home to some of Europe's last remaining virgin forests in the Carpathian Mountains. Virgin nerds! Besides exporting crisp, clean water, Fiji used to be known as the Cannibal Islands, with the Fijian chief Ratu Udre holding the record for most humans ever eaten. He is known to have eaten almost 1,000 humans in his lifetime. Algeria is Africa's largest country, but only 12% of its landmass is populated because the rest is just stupid desert. Yeah, so a lot of those slavery-ridden African countries I mentioned, the UK might have had something to do with that. They also think this is food. Bulgaria is the most unhappy country in the European Union according to a 2019 survey, scoring just 4.8 out of 10 on the happiness scale. Portugal was second at 6.2. Although Germany is mostly blamed for the violence in World War II, don't forget that Japan invaded China and murdered over 20 million Chinese people using the 3 alls policy: kill all, burn all, and loot all. But anime is cool, I guess. Albania officially banned all religious practices in 1967 until the fall of communism in 1991. King Leopold II of Belgium absolutely devastated the Congo. He claimed the territory as his own property and worked it to the bone, collapsing its population by half due to starvation and exhaustion. Belgians are not too proud of their late monarch. In Switzerland in the 19th and 20th centuries, over 500,000 poor children were taken from their families and forced into farm labor. These children were called Waisenkinder, or contract children. The Swiss government officially said, Oh, my bad. In 2013, so that's nice at least. Myanmar is currently undergoing a civil war since 2021 with over 44,000 casualties so far. But since TikTok hasn't told white women to start protesting it yet, you probably have never heard of it. Besides being the hardest song on Guitar Hero 2, Jordan is a Middle Eastern country currently experiencing one of the worst droughts in history. Everyone please send Jordan a soggy envelope of water to show support. There's nothing more embarrassing than talking at a family dinner about your favorite historical subjects, only to be corrected by your sibling going, actually, Napoleon was above average height for his time. You contemplate what to do with the rest of your night since you just got absolutely destroyed. You quickly fact check this verbal beatdown, but realize, oh my god, they were right. How could I have been so wrong? If you don't want this to be you, then listen up, because here's some historical facts that you're probably wrong about. Number 1, the majority of American colonists wanted independence from Great Britain. Since we know that history is written by the winners, it is often thought that the overwhelming majority of American colonists hated the filthy stinking redcoats, an attitude that served as the catalyst for the American Revolution. But that's not entirely true. Sure, there were revolutionaries, but in fact, the colonists who wanted revolution were never even in the majority. Less than 45% of American colonists wanted independence, while the other 55% were either rich loyalists who didn't really want to risk losing their comfy fish and chips way of life, or neutral fence sitters who were just along for the ride, throwing caution to the wind and living their simple peasant lives. Once the revolution did start, however, many loyalists either fled to Canada, cowards, or fought against their own people, only to lose horribly. Number 2, the Declaration of Independence was signed on the 4th of July, 1776. American Independence Day on the 4th of July is a time for Americans to let loose by relaxing by the pool, detonating explosives, and having 1 or 10 beers with friends, family, and whatever remaining fingers they have. Surely a day called Independence Day means that the Declaration of Independence was signed on that day, right? Not exactly. Independence from Britain was actually declared on July 2nd, but the head honchos at the time were like, oh, maybe we should write this down and make it official or something. So after 2 days of figuring out Microsoft Word, they came back with an actual declaration, which was officially adopted on the 4th of July. But since everyone was way too busy celebrating in their pools with some brewskis, it wasn't fully signed until August 2nd, 1776. Number 3, George Washington was the first president of the United States of America. Yeah, a lot of these were a little bit more United States themed than I thought, so I'm either biased or the rest of world history is pretty boring. Probably both. One of the first things American youngins are taught in school is how to lock a door and avoid gunfire. And also that George Washington was the first president. But guess what? Not true. Okay, technically he was the first president elected by the people, but there were several other rich white dudes who held the title of president before him. The first being John Hanson, with the title of President of the United States in Congress assembled. Although he only served for just 1 year, he did help structure the growing baby government we all know and know today. Number 4, Benjamin Franklin discovered electricity. Yeah, no, the concept of electricity was known, though not well understood, for thousands of years back when Egyptians were getting shocked by electric eels and not learning their lessons. The Greeks discovered the concept of static electricity as well by rubbing fur on amber and attracting a few light objects. Benjamin Franklin was chilling on his porch watching a storm when he pondered, that's probably that electricity stuff everyone keeps talking about. So, he got his handy-dandy, trusty, dusty kite to test his theory. He strapped a small metal key to the string to act as a conductor for the electricity. After the key gave him a small jolt, he was like, nice. So while he didn't discover electricity as a whole, he did prove that lightning was electrical. That's kind of cool too. Not being on the $100 bill cool, but cool. Number 5, people in New York threw themselves out of buildings during the 1929 stock market crash. Good times don't last forever, and the United States learned this very quickly when in 1929, the stock market saw the worst crash in history, dropping over 50% in value thanks to irresponsible consumer and bank behavior like predatory loans and purchasing on credit. Who does that? Billions of dollars were wiped out practically overnight. Now, when your wealth and living standard gets Thanos snapped out of existence, you might think that a quick leap and a hard drill into the pavement would solve your problem since you can't be poor if you're dead. Well, maybe some people did think that, but apparently no one's intrusive thoughts won because there was no reported uptick in self-unaliving in the wake of the stock market crash. It would actually be another 72 years before jumping from buildings became a short-lived fad in New York. Number 6, Germany invaded Russia in the winter during World War II. Finally made it out of the United States. Yeah, there's a common misconception that Germans decided to pull a pro-gamer move and invade their barren, tundra, wasteland ally Russia in the dead of winter, prompting the Germans to be like, and turn back home. Not the case. Germans pushed into Russian territory on June 22, 1941, and actually made considerable progress on their way to Moscow, since Russia was not expecting such a top 10 anime betrayal. But tough territory challenges, low morale, and overall exhaustion caused German progress to slow down while new, fresh Russian troops were being spawned in. Once winter set in, things only got worse. Since Russia was hosting, Germans were susceptible to extreme lag and their ping was trash. Germans eventually were driven out of Russia after failing to defeat the Red Army. Number 7. Life expectancy in the Middle Ages was only in the 30s. This is a mathematical misconception here. You love math, right? Right. So the way an average lifespan is calculated is you take the ages across all people and divide by the number of people to get your average. Thing is, babies weren't really resilient. So when you start chucking a bunch of zeros and ones into the data pool, you get a strongly skewed average. In reality, it was common for people in the Middle Ages to live into their 50s and 60s.
I'm 37. What? I'm 37, I'm not old.
Leaving plenty of time for them to do fun things like farming and... So, if you made it to 25 in the Middle Ages, you were expected to live another 25 years on average. Sure, it's shorter than today's expected lifespan of 73 years, but hey, beggars can't be choosers. Number 8. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. Although he is credited with inventions like the phonograph and absolutely terrifying talking nightmare dolls, you probably know Thomas Edison is most famous for inventing the light bulb. Well, that's a lie. Before Edison's design in 1879, electric lighting was used as far back as 1802 with the electric arc lamp. Operating under the same general principle as a light bulb today, the arc lamp generated an electric arc that would light up whatever room it was in. Problem was, these things were loud, expensive, inefficient, and funny enough, way too bright. The design went through multiple improvements in the following decades, making them much more practical for uses like street lamps or lighting large buildings. To his credit, Edison did improve the design further to allow light bulbs to last longer and be more practical in a household setting, but his light bulbs were not the first. Number 9. Cars were invented in the United States by Henry Ford. Well, look at Americans trying to take credit for things yet again. While Henry Ford never invented the automobile, he did revolutionize the mass production of them with the invention of the assembly line. Oh wait, he didn't invent that either. Ransom Olds of the Oldsmobile brand did. But Henry did take that model and improve upon it by making it a moving assembly line, dropping the assembly time of a single car from 12 hours to just 1.5. Oh yeah, and the first gas-powered automobile was invented by Carl Benz, one half of the famous Mercedes-Benz brand, back in 1886, 17 years before Ford's first car was produced. Also, it looks stupid. Number 10. You should subscribe to the channel. Oh wait, this one's true. How'd that get in there? Number 10-2. The Greeks tricked the Trojans with a giant wooden horse. Well, this one's a classic. We've all heard the story of the Trojan horse, proved that people used to pull off good pranks before cameras and ad revenue. The story goes that during the Trojan War in 1183 BC, sneaky Greekies wanted to gain the upper hand in sieging the city of Troy. In order to do so, they built a large wooden horse and left it at the city gate. The Trojans were like, huh, neat, a present, don't mind if I do, ha ha ha, and wheeled it inside of the city. In the middle of the night, when the Trojans were honk-shoeing, Greek soldiers snuck out of the hollow wooden horse and slaughtered the Trojans, leading to the fall of Troy. Yeah, never happened. In fact, it's debated if the Trojan War itself even happened. The story about the Trojan War was written by the Greek poet Homer, who, funny enough, might not have even existed himself. Historians really need to get their act together because it's getting kinda hard to fact-check all of this. Well, there you go. Be sure to bring up whatever you learned today to your next family or friend gathering so they could be like, that's neat. Leading to a dead-end conversation where you just go back to scrolling through your phone. Something weird about every country in the world. Oh, that's weird. A 9.0 magnitude earthquake rumbled Portugal on All Saints' Day in 1755 and was immediately followed up by several tsunamis and large-scale fires because of celebration candles being knocked over in people's houses. It was a rough day. Before it was called Benin in 1975, it used to be called Dahomey because it's where you hung out with all Dahomies. Thanks to legendary marketing, it is a common tradition in Japan to celebrate Christmas Eve with a feast of KFC. This video is not sponsored by KFC, but it could be. Like my toilet, Luxembourg has a big old duke in it. It is the only country in the world to be ruled by a Grand Duke. In China, it is illegal to reincarnate without explicit permission from the government. Imagine police just waiting for you right as you're reborn. Just don't be a girl. Niger is so cool that it has a dinosaur named after it. This complete doofus is called the Nigersaurus. Don't get any funny ideas about pronunciation. In Cambodia, geckos are considered very lucky. It is believed that the number of chirps you hear from your gecko friend determines your future marriage. 1 chirp is good, 2 is not as good. 15 chirps is the percent you could save on your car insurance. Ancient Egyptians had their own police force consisting of specially trained baboons to take down fleeing criminals. The African islands of Sao Tome and Principe are home to this big honkin' rock dog called Cayo Grande or Big Dog, which marks the remains of an ancient volcano. Dominica's national dish is the mountain chicken, which isn't really chicken at all. It's the legs of the giant ditch frog. Yemen's cash crop is khat, a chewable leafy plant that contains cathinone, a stimulant which causes mild euphoria and excitement. Its effects are similar to drinking a very strong coffee. There's an old tradition in Slovakia called the Easter whip, where women are splashed with water and gently whipped with a willow branch to promote fertility and youth. But it just seems like it would be annoying. For those who will eat just about anything, a delicacy in the Philippines is balat, or fertilized duck embryo. Yeah, that's a hard pass for me. In 1969, Honduras and El Salvador battled in the Football War, which began after a heated football match, though tensions surrounding immigration were also a catalyst. The 100-hour war resulted in about 3,000 casualties. Alright, maybe football isn't as boring as I thought. Uzbekistan is home to the Muruntau mine, one of the world's largest open-pit gold mines. There is no Danish word for please. Instead, they say "vær så venlig," which translates to "be so kind," which gives me strong Bioshock vibes.
Get this, would you kindly head to Ryan's office and
subscribe to Chat History.
Over 80% of the island nation of Nauru is now uninhabitable thanks to decades of lucrative phosphate mining. This is St. Vincent, and these are the Grenadines. They penalize homosexual practices, referred to hilariously as buggery, using the penal system. You get the joke. The United Kingdom is made up of England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, so let's not leave them out. England experienced the Great Stink of 1858 thanks to a ton of rotting poo-poo and industrial waste in the River Thames. This prompted the development of a working sewage system. In Wales, only 30% of people can speak Welsh. The national animal of Scotland is the unicorn. Northern Ireland has over 20 miles of peace walls which separate Catholic and Protestant communities from each other. The Wodo-Abe tribe in Chad holds the annual Garawal Festival, where handsome stud muffins participate in a beauty pageant to an audience of potential wives. Right next door is Nigeria, Africa's largest oil exporter. The environment is shit, but the money is lit. In between the islands of St. Kitts and Nevis is a tiny landmass called Booby Island. Nice. The president of Equatorial Guinea has been in power since 1979 and has proclaimed himself a god, free of any consequences for his actions. Not exactly the type of ego you want as a president. The top-selling beverage in Oman is Mountain Dew. Who knew they were such gamers? The Dominican Republic military and law enforcement members are not allowed to vote in any elections to avoid power abuse. Zambia has termite mounds the size of small houses, but to termites, they're huge houses. Apparently, in Croatia, it's frowned upon to leave your house with wet hair lest you succumb to pneumonia. Ukraine looks a little smaller than my last video. Well, the number 4 nuclear reactor at Chernobyl exploded in 1986, forever tarnishing the image of nuclear energy. The United Arab Emirates is home to Dubai, where everyone just looks filthy stinking rich. But with free trade and no income tax, what else are you gonna do? Students in Bangladesh over the age of 15 can face actual jail time for cheating on exams. So would you rather face failure or jailure? 8 days after their infamous attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan invaded and occupied Brunei to secure a source of oil. What an American move. Residents of Papua New Guinea used seashells as currency up until paper money was introduced in 1933, though some tribes still prefer using the shells. Remember, you can't eat money, but you can eat shells. The Mexican city of Mexico City is sinking at a rate of 20 Mexican inches per Mexican year. Within the last Mexican century, it has sunk about 33 Mexican feet. Moldovians love their wine, which isn't too weird, but Moldovians love their wine. The first weekend of October is a national celebration of wine. Bottoms up. Mozambique is the only country in the world whose flag is absolutely strapped, as it sports an AK-47. Guyana is honestly just straight up a Minecraft map. With a very biodiverse landscape, Guyana is home to a coastal plain, a savanna, multiple mountain ranges, and a lush rainforest. So you have plenty of places to choose from to build your first dirt house. Indonesia has so many islands. Look at all these islands. There are over 18,000 of them, with over 6,000 being uninhabited. $20 to whoever can find Penn Island. Are you a fan of communism? If so, there's an attraction in Lithuania where you can subject yourself to becoming a 1984 USSR citizen for 3 hours. Participants sign a waiver confirming that they will carry out any orders without objection or face harsh psychological and physical punishments. Workers of the world, unite! An Ebola virus outbreak in the 90s and 2000s wiped out 90% of Gabon's lowland gorilla population. Bummer. Liechtenstein has no army or airports, so it's easy pickings. Citizens of Turkmenistan love their carpet, so much so that there is an official ministry of carpet in the government to approve all carpet purchases. Under Sharia law in Afghanistan, men are allowed up to 4 wives, but unlimited side babes. South Sudan is the newest country on the map as of this video. It was formally recognized in 2011 after the end of the Second Sudanese Civil War, which killed 1.5 million people. Venezuela's minimum wage is about $6 a month, which is why Venezuelans can make a decent living farming gold on RuneScape, earning a few $100s a month. Argentina has a church dedicated to Diego Maradona, a famous football player from the 70s to the 90s. The parody religion is estimated to have over 9,000 followers, but the guy died in 2020, so where's your god now? The majority of Palestinian land is home to millions of olive trees, with some orchards being thousands of years old. Chile is home to the world's oldest mummies. The dusty Chinchorro mummies are believed to be over 7,000 years old. Suck it, Egypt. The name Sudan comes from the Arabic phrase Bilad al-Sudan, meaning land of the blacks. Hey, I didn't name it. Bahrain has a 400-year-old tree absolutely thriving in the middle of the goddamn desert. If this tree can make it, so can you. Motivational quote of the day. In Eswatini, it is illegal for any witch to fly their broomstick above 150 meters off the ground, which is why Eswatini will never host a Quidditch match. Palau is home to a very unique lake, home to millions of jellyfish called, well, you guessed it, Jellyfish Lake. What's cool is that they've all evolved to lose their stingers since no natural predators exist within the lake. Time to take a dip and slap a jelly. In Ireland, the Mick in last names means son of, and O means grandson or descendant of. So by that logic, McDonald's is the son of 2 Donalds. In 1974, Sweden sold 1,000 Volvo cars to North Korea for $73 million. The bill is still unpaid as of today and is valued at $330 million with interest. Probably best to just write that one off as a loss. On the Yap Islands in Micronesia, you can find large limestone discs called rye stones. These were used as ceremonial gifts and currency. Their value lies in what people perceive it to be. Kind of like Bitcoin. Poland is the world leader in exporting amber, which is used in jewelry and souvenirs. I don't know, something about this just really bugs me. If insects weren't enough for you, try some Vietnamese snake wine. The diluted venom adds a nice kick to it. Don't worry, it's safe to drink. Sometimes. In the 1870s, Belgians hired 37 cats to deliver mail, citing their magnificent sense of direction as foolproof. Didn't work out so well. If you're a huge fan of sand like you know you are, you can head on down to Namibia and visit Kolmanskop, an abandoned diamond mining town where resources dried up in the 1930s. Your Roomba is gonna have to put in some overtime. Since 2011, chess lessons have been mandatory in every public school in Armenia. Suriname is a South American country in South America, but the official language is Dutch. The Samoan Islands were split in 1899 between Germany and the United States. The US owns American Samoa, and New Zealand now owns Samoa. But it's all the same shit. The name Timor-Leste comes from the Malay Timor, meaning east, and the Portuguese Leste, meaning east. Welcome to Eastern East. Not just Gambia, but the Gambia. This African country was once ruled by President Yahya Jammeh, a bonkers dude who would perform literal witch hunts, torture HIV patients with dangerous fake treatments, and claimed he would rule for 1 billion years. He ruled for 22. In Nepal, cows are sacred. Like, really sacred. I'm talking clean your house with their poop sacred. Ah, smells fresh. North Macedonia is home to one of the world's largest crosses. That's cool, I guess. I wonder when they're gonna install the giant Jesus that goes with it. If you have a unibrow, you're considered very attractive in Tajikistan. And only in Tajikistan. Are you a witch? If yes, you might want to visit the Witch's Pond in Romania. Rumor is that Vlad the Impaler got his noggin lobbed off here, so it's pretty neat. Yakuba Sawadogo of Burkina Faso was an absolute beast. This guy stopped the desertification of the landscape by planting a forest using ancient farming techniques. He brought together communities of farmers and taught them this technique, preventing further erosion of farmland. And he did all this without filming it for ad revenue. Fuck kangaroos. Australia is home to more Arabian camels than Egypt and even exports some of them to the Middle East. The capital of Singapore is Singapore. You can purchase a private island off the coast of Nicaragua. Well, not you, but someone with actual money can. Latvia lost 250,000 people, or 12.5% of its population, by the end of World War II. Ecuador is home to the Galapagos Islands, where Charles Darwin developed his theory of evolution. But that's just a theory, supported by evidence. The original native Jamaicans, the Arawaks, were almost entirely wiped out in the 1400s thanks to the Spanish coming over, enslaving them and coughing in their faces. Men in Lebanon are legally allowed to pursue physical relations with an animal, but they have to be female, otherwise it would just be ridiculous. Spain annually hosts El Colacho, the baby jumping festival. Men dress up as the devil and jump over at babies lying on mattresses in the street. Watch out for the soft spots. Monaco is basically just a city full of circle-jerking rich folks. If you go there without 7 digits in your bank account, you'll be spit on like the peasant that you are. An island in the Bahamas is home to 20 to 30 feral pigs of unknown origin. They're a pretty cute tourist attraction, not gonna lie. Too bad half of them died because they ate sand. In Turkey, it's common for people to eat meat as a dessert. You can try tavuk guso, a delicacy made from milk, sugar, cinnamon, and shredded chicken. It's probably pretty banging. Kuwait has the highest valued currency in the world. 1 Kuwaiti dinar is about $3 US as of this video. Gotta love oil. In Libya, you can visit Ubari, a desert town that has a bunch of lakes near it. And thank goodness too, cause boy am I thirsty. Oh wait, these are saltwater lakes. Greeks can spit on you, but it's for good luck, so wish them even more luck back. Canadians use bagged milk. You guys are weird. When you think of ancient castle moats, you might think of water infested with crocodiles, but Český Krumlov Castle in the Czech Republic used a moat of bears to deter enemies. There's even some still there today. Hungarian man Erno Rubik invented his famous cube, and placed upon it a famous pube. Fancy breakfast? Better head on over to Belarus to celebrate Maslenitsa, also known as Pancake Week. Pass the syrup, please. Lesotho, or Lesotho, or however you want to say it, is known as the Kingdom in the Sky because even at its lowest point, it is over 4,500 feet above sea level, so it's like way up there. Trinidad and Tobago has a natural asphalt pit. This slop hole of road juice spans 99 acres and is 246 feet deep. Cyprus has a wishing tree. Simply write your wish on a ribbon or a piece of cloth and tie it to the tree and it just might never come true. Due to scarce resources, North Koreans sometimes use their own soft serve as fertilizer for crops. Honey, I think something's wrong with the vegetables. They're looking a little shitty.
I know. You're welcome.
US President Abraham Lincoln once complimented San Marino, so they granted him honorary citizenship. Paraguay's got a heck of a strong navy, especially for a country that's completely landlocked. The megalithic temples of Malta are some of the oldest standing structures in the world, dating back to 3600 BC, and they would probably make a pretty neat Counter-Strike map. You know the capital of Thailand is Bangkok, but that's only a nickname. The real name is this. In Morocco, the organ of love isn't the heart, it's the liver. Cheers to that. The national dish of Comoros is lobster and a vanilla sauce. Costa Rica has no army. It was abolished in 1949 after a civil war. The military budget was instead put towards education. Kiribati is quickly sinking thanks to rising sea levels, but now everyone has oceanfront property, so it balances out. There is no speed limit on the majority of the German Autobahn, so be sure to watch out in the left lane as I'm zooming past at 300 kilowatts per hour. In Colombia, you can find the Caño Cristales, also called the River of Five Colors, thanks to aquatic plants and algae. I swear the yellow's not from me. Between 1949 and 1989, the USSR conducted 456 nuclear tests in Kazakhstan, which wasn't very beneficial to the local population. Hey, it's the middle of the video. Time to hydrate.
Back to the video.
In Mauritius, there are tales of a werewolf who can transform into various animals. In his human form, he is covered in oil, making him too slippery to catch. Air pollution in Bosnia and Herzegovina sucks, especially in the winter months when everyone is burning coal and wood to stay warm. India has a skeleton lake in the Himalayas where the remains of over 300 people have been at rest for a few thousand years. In 2022 and 2023, the Tanzanian government approved the forcible removal of the indigenous Maasai tribe. This paved the way for a United Arab Emirates company to establish trophy hunting and elite tourism spots. Dick move, UAE. Andorra is a popular tax haven for many wow webcam sites, but you shouldn't be looking at that kind of stuff. If you ever find yourself in Estonia, be sure to visit a local village swing, cause they look fun as hell. In Georgia, aka Sakratvelo, you can find Vartsia, a 6,000 room cave city. It just reminds me a lot of Markarth in Skyrim. In Kyrgyzstan, you can play Kizku, a horseback kissing game where you have to steal a kiss from your opponent. Kizku? No, kiss you. Mwah. Malaysia follows a unique rotating monarchy system, meaning that 9 different kings rule for 5 years at a time. In Malawi, mosquito nets were distributed amongst the population to reduce malaria outbreaks, but everyone just used them to fish instead, causing a huge surge in overfishing. Falconry is a big deal in Qatar. You can even bring your winged friend on a plane as long as it has a valid passport.
Who's my good little boy?
There are about as many horses in Mongolia as there are people. Everyone needs a horse. Homes in Uruguay don't typically have numbers, but are instead named. What would you name your house? Americans love spending money, even money that they don't have. That's why the public credit card debt is over $1 trillion. Now, it's just gonna ask you a few questions. Thanks. Brazil is home to over 100 uncontacted, isolated tribes, the most in the world. One sneeze, and they're all gone. Bulgarian mothers will often tie a red thread on the wrists of newborns to protect them from evil spirits. Sierra Leone had an iconic cotton tree in the capital city of Freetown. It survived hundreds of years before a big ol' storm blew it over in 2023. Bhutan has a thing for drawing weenies and peenies everywhere. Here's them blurred because, censorship. Residents paint the floppy phalluses all over as a symbol of good fortune to fend off evil spirits. Ooh. Oh, gross. Modern-day Iraq stands upon what was once the world's oldest civilization, Mesopotamia. The Bolivian salt flats are something straight out of a dream. The calm, shallow waters provide a clear reflection of the sky and make for a darn good desktop wallpaper. Serbia has balls. Big stone ones called the Pavlin globes that are said to heal and grant the wishes of those who fondle the large spheres. Tonga is the only Pacific country to not be colonized, and that's a point of pride of the Tongan people. In the Netherlands, over 30% of Dutch women give birth in the comfort of their own homes. In 1492, the Spanish sailed the ocean blue, then invaded Barbados, killed and enslaved the local population. In 1498, Emperor Maximilian I was sick of hearing castrated men sing in his choir, so he formed the Vienna Boys Choir, which still exists in Austria today, with new members of course. Zeoli dancers from Côte d'Ivoire are easily voted the worst upstairs neighbors in the world. Despite being known for exporting crisp, clean water, over half the population of Fiji does not have access to crisp, clean water. Across the Siangkawan Plains in Laos, you can find thousands of ancient jars scattered across the landscape. However, no ancient cookies have ever been recovered. Switzerland has some of the most relaxed gun laws in the world, with 1 in 4 Swiss people owning a gun. As such, Switzerland's crime rate ranks among the lowest in the world. Start taking notes, America. Grab your bros, cause every Friday in Angola is Men's Day. Angolan men will go out, drink, and party, leaving their girlfriends and wives at home. If you ever want to look like a complete badass Rwandan final boss, you can adopt the traditional Amansunzu hairstyle. This instantly adds +20 to intimidation. Cape Verde was never inhabited until the 1460s when Portuguese explorers colonized the islands and brought African slaves over. Azerbaijanis celebrate Nowruz, a celebration of winter's end. Traditions include eavesdropping, eating salty cake, and putting apple seeds under your pillow. Ethiopians use a 13-month calendar, 12 months with 30 days each, and a 13th month with 5 or 6. This means Ethiopia is 8 years behind the rest of the world. The Solomon Islands are a great destination if you want to explore wrecks of sunken World War II planes and ships, because that's where World War II planes and ships sank. The Maldives have a flag, within a flag. Pretty cool flag. Israel and Palestine are the best of friends and finally at peace. And then you wake up and wonder why you just dreamt about the end of a 75-year conflict. Botswana's Okavango River doesn't flow into a sea or a lake, it just kind of leaks out over the land. Just give me 1 second, excuse me. There you go. Snow is becoming more and more common in the Sahara Desert, with recent snowfalls being reported in northwest Algeria in 2023. Slavery was abolished in Mauritania in 1981, but wasn't criminalized until 2015, and as of 2016, there were still 43,000 known slaves in the country. Ever get thirsty at a gym and you gotta gulp down a few crisp glugs from an LK Easy S8L? In Italy, you can slurp that sweet, or dry, red good from a free 24-hour wine fountain found in Caldari di Ortona. Salute! In Guinea-Bissau, it's custom for boys of the Agande tribe to survive alone in the forest for several months as a trial towards manhood. In 2019, the Central African Republic was ranked as the world's hungriest country. So when your mom tells you that there are starving children in Africa who would love your unfinished dinner, tell her to cook better. Senegal has a tiny island made entirely from seashells. You're gonna wanna wear shoes or else your little piggies are gonna get hurt. Liberia was founded in the early 1800s by the American Colonization Society as a safe haven for freed slaves. Some Albanians hang teddy bears or stuffed animals from their rooftops to scare away evil spirits. Ooh. Aw, this is way better than Bhutan. Syria is home to the world's oldest known library in the city of Ebla. Have fun reading your rock, nerd. If you're like me, like I know I am, you know that you're going to die someday, so why not go out in style like they do in Ghana with a fantasy coffin? These unique caskets are sure to keep your family laughing as they huck you into the ground. Before the Zimbabwe dollar was abolished in 2009, $1 US was equivalent to 35 quadrillion Zimbabwe dollars. Beginning in 1598, Russia entered the times of trouble, which plagued the country with political turmoil and famine. It ended once Mikhail Romanov was elected as Tsar, establishing the House of Romanov. Mali is currently on year 12 of a civil war. Best to avoid Mali until they get that sorted out. Many residents of Guinea still opt for going to a traditional healer when feeling sick, and if things get really bad, the healer will tell them to go to a real doctor. Burundi is home to a vicious man-eating crocodile named Gustav. He is said to have eaten over 300 people, is almost 70 years old, and weighs over 2,000 pounds. He's a big boy. Christopher Columbus reached Haiti in 1492 to the warm welcome of 400,000 Taino people. 10 years later, the population would drop to just 3,000 Taino people. If you're in Iceland, nature wants to kill you. Wind, water, snow, rocks, volcanoes, they all want you dead. Djibouti is one of the driest African countries. It has no reliable freshwater sources, so bottled water could be used as a form of payment if you forgot your wallet. A treasure hidden by French pirate Olivier Levasseur is said to be somewhere in Seychelles. It is estimated to be worth over $1 billion. The One Piece is real. My fortune is yours for the taking, but you'll have to find it first. I left everything I own in Seychelles. Beginning in 1920, single mothers in France can be awarded medals of honor for raising more than 4 children. Gold is awarded for 8 or more children, silver for 6 or 7, and bronze for 4 or 5. Pakistan produces 40% of the world's soccer balls. Football balls. It is believed that HIV originated in Cameroon in 1908 after an infected chimpanzee was hunted for meat. St. Lucia is the only country in the world to be named after a woman. In 2007, Iranian officials arrested a team of 14 spy squirrels who allegedly wore recording devices. A dead pope once stood trial in the Vatican City, and I covered this in another video, so be sure to check that out. Wink. The Blue Hole in Belize is one of the deepest ocean sinkholes in the world. You couldn't pay me to go over that dang thing. Antigua and Barbuda named their highest mountain peak Mount Obama after the American president. Thanks, Obama. The oldest known instrument in the world, a 55,000-year-old pipe, was found in Slovenia. Yeah, good job, Slovenia. The island nation of Tuvalu makes bank by selling the rights of their international domain .tv to media websites worldwide, earning around $7 million a year from this alone. You think Twitch.tv meant .television? Nope. Twitch.tuvalu. Before Somalia was Somalia, it was called Punt, meaning land of the gods. Despite being 95% desert, Saudi Arabia has to import sand from Australia. Arabian sand isn't very suitable for construction purposes. In Vanuatu, natives on the island of Pentecost perform the ritual of Nangal, where they bungee jump off of rickety towers using vines as cords. It goes just about as well as you would think. The median age of the Ugandan population is about 16 years old thanks to low life expectancy but high fertility. Tunisia is home to the ancient city of Carthage. You know, the one that got its shit kicked in by the Romans a few thousand years ago? Yeah, that Carthage. The country of Eritrea has no official language, so go somewhere else. The formation of Panama over 20 million years ago is regarded as one of the most important environmental events to ever occur, as it has helped regulate ocean temperatures and weather conditions. Good job, Panama. Thanks to their Belgian colonizers, the people of the Democratic Republic of the Congo have an unhealthy obsession with mayonnaise. The Marshall Islands established the world's largest shark sanctuary in 2011. And boy, are those sharks happy. I mean, look at that smile. Myanmar is only one of 3 countries to not use the metric system. They instead use the Burmese system, meaning that there are 20 Kathas and an Althaba. Apparently, Montenegro has a fake prince. Stefan Chernitic has been meeting other royals and celebrities for years, presenting himself as Prince of Montenegro and Macedonia, but neither regions have had royal families for ages. To no surprise, Kenya pumps out some of the best long-distance runners in the world. In South Korea, age is done a little bit differently. You see, when you're born, you're immediately 1 year old, as it's your first year of age, and then you gain an additional year each January 1st on the new year. So if you're born on December 31st, you're instantly 2 years old the next day. Historians think the name Guatemala either originates from land of the plentiful forests or mountain of vomiting water, hopefully the latter. The national sport of Madagascar is merengue, or bare knuckle boxing, and it's brutal. Oh, what's that? You thought Ireland was the potato capital of the world? No. Peru has over 4,000 different types of potato, from this kind to that kind. In New Zealand, you can find a big ol' hill with a big ol' name, and that name is... Yeah, I'm not gonna pronounce that. You do it. South Africa has a great chain of Christian Bible and religious text stores called Cumbooks. Oh, gross, all my pages are stuck together. In 2021, El Salvador recognized Bitcoin as legal tender. Let's just hope that they all have diamond hands. The Republic of the Congo is where you would find the famous Pygmy tribe, an indigenous tribe whose members are unusually short in stature, with men averaging 5 feet and women averaging just 4 feet. It has only ever snowed in Cuba once in 1857. Poor Cuba. Grenada has an underwater sculpture garden you can visit on a diving trip. It's honestly creepy as hell. There is a Sri Lankan belief that if you do not satisfy a mother's strange pregnancy cravings, it will cause her to become weak and the fetus angry. So stock up on the pickles and the peanut butter. Half of the population of Togo practices voodoo, but it isn't violent and evil like movies portray. It's actually very spiritual. The world's oldest dam can be found in Jordan. The Jawa Dam was built some 6,000 years ago, but now that there's no water around, it doesn't look all that impressive. Damn. This is what it looks like when you visit Norway. This is what it looks like when Norway visits you. A group of Finnish students established the International Day of Failure in 2010. Those celebrating are to reflect on past failures and learn from them. The holiday occurs every October 13th, so if that's your birthday, congrats, you're a failure. Learned from it. So that's it for all the countries. I do have 2 honorable mentions which only have partial diplomatic recognition, but I had people ask about them in my last video, so there you go. Over 90% of Taiwanese people suffer very poor short-sightedness thanks to endless hours spent on screens and in the classroom. Taiwanese children spend less than half an hour outside each day. Apparently Kosovo is pretty pro-American, and that's all I need to know to say that Kosovo is A-okay in my book. Hey guys, today we're gonna see how some small mistakes in history led to some pretty big consequences, so strap in with your favorite toothpaste and orange juice, cause here we go. King of Scots Alexander III was revered by his subjects as a kind and noble king, so he was a pretty cool guy. He put an end to an ongoing war with Norway with the signing of the Treaty of Perth. This stopped the invading Vikings from doing their stereotypical graping and pillaging and made them frig off back to Norway. The treaty also let Scotland gain possession of the Western Isles and the Isle of Man. With all this land expansion going on, as well as increased exports and cash flow, Scotland entered a bit of a golden age. Everything was pretty good until it wasn't. After all, no story is complete without some good old-fashioned character development from a Disney Pixar family tragedy. In the mid-1280s, King Alexander's wife, Queen Margaret, bit the dust, which was pretty devastating since they were married since childhood. Well, at least he had his own children to care for. Except for the fact that they all died too. Little Margaret Jr., who hilariously became Queen of Norway, expired at the age of 22 while pooping out her only child, a daughter named... Margaret. We'll get to her later. Alex Jr. died on his 20th birthday at the age of 20. Don't know how he died either, sources just say he just died. The youngest child, David, also kicked an uneventful bucket at age 19. With his family tree essentially trimmed down to the trunk, Alex was desperate to generate new successors, so he married a French countess, Yolande of Dreux. She moved in with the king, but like in a different town for some reason. Well, one night the king was acting pretty eager to perform, so he set out to do the deed of sowing his seed, and nothing was going to block his urge to splurge. Nope, not even that. Despite pleads and warnings from bro-code breaking advisors, the king set out to get his dunk sunked. He had a few of his servants accompany him as guides, and they made it to the queen, but the king, on the other hand, got separated in the harsh storm and was subsequently yeeted off of his horse over a cliff where he was found the next morning, dead as a doornail. With no other heir, it was Margaret Jr.'s time to shine. But since she was only 3 years old and with the attention span of a goldfish, the political landscape of Scotland fell into ruin, ending the short-lived Golden Age, all because the king needed to slam some sweet queen skush. As I'm sure you know, the luxurious ocean liner Titanic was the ship of dreams that ended up becoming a complete nightmare. The ship died in 1912 after Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet distracted the two lookouts in the crow's nest from observing the giant fucking iceberg floating several hundred feet in front of them. Despite the crew's best efforts, the ship collided with the iceberg and got flushed into the North Atlantic a few hours later. Joking aside, it is believed that the entire disaster could have been prevented, or at least significantly reduced, if it weren't for one key mistake: an actual missing key. Lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee were tasked with the important task of making sure that no icebergs were in the ship's path. In the crow's nest, the two men were equipped with a warning bell and a telephone to alert crew of any potential dangers in the chilled waters ahead. They also had one more tool: a pair of binoculars which were secured in a box. A locked box with a missing key. Apparently, this key was accidentally taken off of the ship before it set sail by a second officer, David Blair. What's this here in my pocket? Huh. I'm sure that's not a big deal. With no binoculars, the lookouts had to rely on eyesight alone. And that wouldn't be so terrible if it weren't for the fact that the night was extremely dark, cold, and calm, making it very hard to see icebergs. Luckily, there were almost none all night. Almost. Both lookouts miraculously survived the sinking and, when interviewed, agreed that if they had binoculars, they could have seen the iceberg and reacted more quickly, avoiding the unnecessary loss of over 1,500 lives, but dooming James Cameron's film career. The key, donated to the British Sailor Society by Officer Blair's daughter, was eventually sold at auction for 90,000 British pounds. If you've ever dealt with the trouble of remembering how many tablespoons are in a gallon, or that there's 660 feet in a furlong, you probably long for the ease of the metric system. Being an American myself, I'm genetically inclined to detest the anti-freedom units, but getting an engineering degree made me appreciate the simplicity of the metric system. I mean, guys, it's really great. Everything is just a multiplicative of 10. Kilogram, it's 1,000 grams. A meter, it's 100 centimeters. Like, wow, amazing. Anyway, that convenience was stolen from us by a band of scallywag pirates during America's infancy. In 1793, Secretary of State Thomas Mother Effin Jefferson recognized that the United States needed to standardize their units of measure as multiple systems were being used, making commercial trading a logistical nightmare. Luckily, the French of all people had an answer. Scientist Joseph Dombey was dispatched to the United States with a special gift: a carefully crafted copper cylinder which would serve as the revolutionary new standard in weight measurement: the kilogram. Just one component of France's newly developing metric system. While sailing to the States with his cylinder in one hand and the kilogram in the other, Dombey's ship was blown off course by a storm. Now headed for the 1700s Caribbean. British pirates at the time usually attacked non-British ships to impede their trade, and unfortunately Dombey was one of those victims. He was held hostage for ransom but died in captivity. Dombey's death meant that Jefferson never got the metric standard, meaning it was never adopted. So the United States stuck with the English units as their standard. While it is possible that we could all be measuring our all-beef francs using centimeters, it's doubtful, as multiple attempts over the years to implement the metric system have been defeated at the greasy hand of American pride. Ethiopia and Italy typically aren't two countries that you would hear about in the same sentence. But during the late 1800s, when Africa was getting absolutely reamed by colonization, Italy had its sights set on some potential land expansion candidates. One of them being, you guessed it, Eritrea, Ethiopia's northern neighbor. This led to a bit of an unofficial scuffle called the Italo-Ethiopian War of 1887, which lasted for 2 years and ended with Italy formally occupying Eritrea and the signing of the Treaty of Wuchal. Among other rules, the treaty basically stated that peace was to remain between Italy and Ethiopia. However, one article had two different meanings between languages. In Italian, the article stated that Ethiopia must act through Italy if they wish to do business with other governments. The Amharic or Ethiopian version stated that Ethiopia can act through Italy for external business, which suggested that it wasn't mandatory. Very different things. The treaty was nonetheless signed and eventually the two countries clashed again. Italy claimed that it had full control over Ethiopia's external affairs, but Ethiopia claimed, "Nuh-uh, dude." Italy then invaded Ethiopia in 1895, starting the official First Italo-Ethiopian War. With Italy's army of 44,000 against Ethiopia's 125,000, the Italians ended up getting their spaghetti-eating teeth kicked in, securing Ethiopia's independence in 1896. Until Italy invaded again in 1935. Italy won that time. All in all, around 25,000 lives were lost during the First Italo-Ethiopian War, all because Italy decided to skip its daily Duolingo sessions. When you're a power-hungry dictator to millions of food-hungry citizens, your people will probably hate you, which is something that Joseph Stalin was shocked to find out when leading the Soviet Union from 1924 until his death in 1953. Although he came into power with some strong initial support, it quickly dried up as his first few years sucked eggs. He went balls deep into national industrialization and uprooted the agricultural system. No food means famine, and famine means people die. So, people died. Millions of them. Stalin was now officially an asshole, and assholes need to be wiped clean. His political rivals demanded his removal, prompting Stalin to switch to defense mode. In doing so, he began stringent investigations of the government for anyone who might even toy with the idea of questioning his policies. Yes, hello, I have question. No one was safe. During what came to be known as the Great Purge between 1936 and 1938, Stalin expanded his investigations to anyone he deemed a threat to the Soviet Union. By the end, there were over 700,000 documented executions of workers, artists, teachers, whoever, while in reality it is estimated to be about 1.2 million. Even his own Red Army saw 37,000 soldiers executed or sentenced to labor camps. And these weren't just lowly foot soldiers either, I'm talking like commanders and generals, his top guys. Stalin was absolutely unhinged, with his paranoia destroying his mental and physical health. He ended up surviving a severe heart attack and a stroke in 1945, with his health never fully recovering. On the night of February 28, 1953, Stalin was chilling with some bros, watching movies and having dinner. After a long night of joking and smooches, Stalin retired to his private quarters, specifically instructing not to be disturbed until he woke up the next morning. Well, the next morning came and nothing. Afternoon, nothing. Remember that even his closest friends were terrified of defying him lest they be sent to the gulag. Night came, still nothing. And by now, they're pretty worried. It wasn't until 11 p.m. that a housekeeper dared to check on Stalin. He was found on the ground unconscious and unresponsive. Still terrified to call the doctor, it took another 8 hours for Stalin to receive medical attention. With an extremely high blood pressure of 190/110, Stalin had suffered another intense stroke. He received around-the-clock care for 3 days before he ultimately despawned on March 5th, 1953. Had he been kinder to his bros and not such a complete butthole, he may have been treated sooner and survived his ailment, even if it was short-lived. The Soviet Union eventually collapsed in 1991.
Something bad about every US state.
In no particular order.
Hawaii is our most recent state added to the Big 50 in 1959. The US government had their eyeballs all over the little group of islands as a strategic military outpost in the 1800s. Not to mention the sugarcane plantations. Freedom forbid any smelly European or Asian countries get their grubby paws on it, so with that in mind, as well as wanting to circumvent any potential sugar tariffs, a couple of US businessmen with a couple of US Marines pointed a couple of their US guns at Hawaiian King Kalakaua in 1887, forcing him to sign over power to the United States. But after the king Kame his last Hame, his sister, Queen Liliuokalani, tried to regain power, but the US was all, ha! So one cuckoo kachu later, and the Republic of Hawaii was established in 1894, led by one Sanford Dole, whose cousin would go on to form the Hawaiian Pineapple Company, which would later become the Dole Food Company. If you've never had it, Dole Whip is freaking amazing. Highly recommend it. Ground zero for the 1918 influenza pandemic, the deadliest pandemic of the modern world, is widely believed to have been Camp Funston in Manhattan, Kansas. The camp itself was an army base training infantry in the closing months of World War I. Well, with failure to quarantine sick troops, the flu was definitely not just in Kansas anymore. Sickly soldiers were sent overseas where they oversneezed in Europe, spreading the flu worldwide. By the end of the pandemic around 1921, roughly 500 million people around the globe had been infected, with death toll estimates ranging from 50 to 100 million poor souls. July 16, 1945 saw the detonation of the world's first nuclear weapon at the Trinity Nuclear Testing Site in the Jornada del Muerto Desert in New Mexico. The successful detonation was the catalyst for the construction of the 2 atomic bombs that were dropped on Japan towards the end of World War II. It's just a shame that thousands of New Mexico locals were never warned about the testing because they caught some heavy radiation dosages. Between the years of 1948 and 1975, the Aberdeen Proving Ground facility in Aberdeen, Maryland, hosted a wealth of unethical human experiments on U.S. Army soldiers. About 7,000 soldiers were experimented on, all without informed consent, meaning that they had no idea what they were getting into. The men were exposed to over 250 different chemical weapons, including mustard gas, deadly nerve agents, and psychoactive substances for the sake of researching effects, preventative measures, and medical treatments. Despite the lethality of some of these substances, dosages were low enough where no deaths were reported. These are getting dark really quick. So here's a silly one. The Aroostook War of 1838 was a bloodless armed standoff between American and British Canadian lumberjacks. While they slept all night and worked all day, there was a disagreement about where the US-Canadian border actually was. So both sides, eager to chop into the Aroostook River Valley's supple, sappy trees, got into a bit of a kerfuffle. Troops were deployed, but no shots were fired and no lives were lost. Instead, everyone skipped and jumped home to cut down trees on their respective sides. The 1974 super outbreak was one of the most intense tornado outbreaks in recorded history, with 147 separate tornadoes formed in a 25-hour period across 13 states, with Indiana being hit the hardest. 47 fatalities, 1,000 injuries, and hundreds of millions of dollars in damages were reported. That blows. Just slightly west of Virginia is West Virginia, home to the worst mining disaster in the history of the United States, so far. On December 6, 1907, the Fairmont Coal Company's number 6 and number 8 mine shafts in the town of Monongah went kablooey. 2 separate methane explosions instantly killed hundreds of workers in the mines and trapped any of those fortunate enough to survive, but their luck quickly ran out. The combined blast collapsed most of the existing cave structure and the ventilation shaft, blocking off fresh air and building up toxic gases which suffocated the trapped miners. The lack of any safety standards or respiratory safety equipment made rescue attempts hopeless. Only 5 men managed to be saved, with 362 lives lost. The tragedy sparked public outcry for stricter safety standards, and in 1910, the US government established the Bureau of Mines with the goal of reducing mining accidents, though it had been a few decades before any safety standards would be enforced. Bet you don't yearn for the mines anymore, do you? In 1879, members of the Osage Native tribe struck oil on their reservation. The US government did what it does and quickly swooped in to establish oil production and paid out royalties to the members of the Osage tribe, catapulting them to astronomical levels of wealth. And that's when the mysterious death started. You see, Congress, not believing that the natives were capable of managing their wealth by themselves, appointed American businessmen and lawyers to look after their finances as legal guardians. Well, throughout the 1920s, some of these guardians began the systematic murder of 60 Osage natives in order to inherit their wealth. Formal investigations were launched, becoming one of the first major investigations conducted by the FBI. If you want to read more about this, I highly recommend the book Killers of the Flower Moon. There was also a film adaptation done recently, but it apparently wasn't as good. Louisiana. In the early 1900s, there was a plethora of invasive water hyacinths just gunking up the local rivers. Not to mention a pervasive meat shortage. So in order to feed two birds with one stone, the American Hippo Bill was proposed to Congress. The bill would import African hippos to munch on the plants, only for said hippos to be subsequently munched on by Americans. Other animals were on the list, including Manchurian pigs, African buffalo, Tibetan yaks, rhinos, and of course, dicks. Sadly, the bill never passed, thwarting American plans to deep throat delicious and nutritious dick meat. A series of massive earthquakes completely rocked southeast Missouri in 1811. One 8.0 magnitude earthquake was so severe that it caused sections of the Mississippi River to flow backwards and several parts of the surrounding landscape to go all bleh. Some people died, probably. On April 12, 1861, those gosh dang Confederates bombarded Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina for 34 hours straight and 0 hours gay, marking the start of the United States Civil War, which would go on to claim the lives of nearly 700,000 people. The worst massacre in US history involving a school dates all the way back to 1927 in the small town of Bath, Michigan. Local disgruntled douche Andrew Kehoe used dynamite to destroy the Bath Consolidated School, an expensive upgrade to the local school district. The construction and maintenance of the school caused local property taxes to shoot up to account for operating costs. Kehoe, who was already on edge from his failing farming and political careers, as well as a terminally ill wife, had hit a breaking point with the steeper tax burden. Over the course of several months, Kehoe had managed to purchase multiple crates of dynamite, something typically used in farming at the time for stump and boulder removal, and hid them throughout the school. On the morning of May 18, 1927, the dynamite was detonated, killing 38 in the process and injuring dozens more. While the chaos ensued, Kehoe had murdered his wife, destroyed his own farm, and drove to the school with his truck packed with more dynamite. He parked his car in front of the school and detonated the truck, taking himself and a few bystanders out with him. Luckily though, a second horde of dynamite within the school failed to detonate, preventing further loss of life. This single tragedy had claimed a quarter of the town's children. California, the United States' sweaty ass crack, boasts the largest economy in the country, which is perfect, because that's what they need to constantly fund relief efforts for the thousands of wildfires each year burning millions of acres. In 2020 alone, California saw over 9,600 wildfires with almost 4.4 million acres reduced to char. Do better. Get wetter. Extremely heavy and frequent rainfall in 1926 through 1927 culminated in the Great Mississippi River Flood of 1927. The big ol' river traveled across the land, flooding far and wide through several states including Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee, and of course, Mississippi. Around 500 souls were washed away and several hundred thousands of people were displaced from their homes, resulting in upwards of $10 billion in damages. The U.S.-Dakota War of 1862 in Minnesota resulted in the largest public execution in United States history. The people of the Dakota Native American tribe were pretty darn pissed as incoming settlers sought to manifest their destiny across the Midwest. After constant displacement and being on the brink of starvation due to poor farming and hunting conditions, the Dakota had just about enough. A small group of Dakota men had attacked and killed 5 settlers, including a man, his wife, and their teenage daughter. This escalated into a small uprising which was stomped out by the US Volunteer Army over the course of about a month and a half. Over 350 US civilians were massacred, with 150 Dakota natives killed in the clash. After all was said and done, 400 Dakota men faced trial with 303 sentenced to death, though President Lincoln did reduce this down to just 38 men sentenced for execution. These men received their short drop and a sudden stop in front of a public crowd on December 26, 1862. Since 2007, over 20 detached and decayed human feet have been washed ashore along the coast of the Salish Sea in northeastern Washington. The feet have been found in various shoes, supposedly protected from additional predation from scavengers. Several of the feet have been identified as remains of missing people or those suspected of ending their own life within the area. Pretty sad, but hey, free shoes. In perhaps the worst lapse of judgment in the history of mankind, the city of Cleveland, Ohio organized Balloon Fest in 1986. The goal of the event was to break a world record of most balloons released simultaneously, but I guess no one realized that balloons don't rise in perpetuity. Shortly after the release of over 1.5 million inflatables, a storm system promptly blew the elastic spheres back to Earth, blanketing the city and polluting Lake Erie. Airplanes were grounded, fishermen went missing, waterways became clogged, and many lawsuits were issued. All in all, the cleanup cost the city of Cleveland over $5 million. The people of Oregon really hate it when you pronounce it as Oregon, so I've experienced. But anyway, a few months after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, a single Japanese pilot flew a secret mission to bomb the forests of Oregon in an attempt to divert war supplies. Incendiary bombs were dropped in the forests of Brookings, but in terms of damage, they didn't do jack shit.
Thanks.
After the war, the Japanese pilot, Nobuo Fujita, was invited back to Brookings as a guest of honor in order to make amends, which he hesitantly accepted. As a formal apology for his actions, Fujita presented the city his family heirloom katana, one passed down across 400 years, which is still on display in the Chetco Public Library to this day. Timothy Treadwell was a huge fan of wild grizzly bears. Keyword being was. He spent about 13 summers living amongst them in Alaska. Returning one final time towards the end of autumn, the bears then became a huge fan of Timothy. One giant grizzly had attacked Timothy and his girlfriend, mauling and eating the couple. The bear was later shot and killed, with an autopsy confirming human remains in its stomach. Fellas, don't befriend giant wild animals. I don't care how cute their ears are. They're wild animals. They will murder you. North Carolina almost became No Carolina in 1961 after a B-52 bomber carrying a payload of 2 nuclear bombs headed towards the Canadian Arctic experienced a catastrophic failure and broke up mid-air shortly after takeoff. The destroyed aircraft unintentionally dropped the bombs back down to Earth, with one falling from the plane as if properly deployed, initiating a sequence of safety switches for detonation. However, one final safety switch failed to actuate, saving North Carolina and a few surrounding states from becoming nothing more than a big black smudge on the globe. The other bomb slammed into the Earth, but very luckily remained intact and relatively undamaged. Both bombs were rated as 3.8 megaton bombs, about 250 times more powerful than those dropped on Japan at the end of World War II. So yeah, the US almost accidentally nuked itself into oblivion. During the events of World War II, tens of thousands of Japanese Americans were relocated to several internment camps across the country out of fear of domestic attacks. One such camp was the Hart Mountain Camp in Park County, Wyoming, which housed 14,000 Japanese Americans during its 3 years of operation between 1942 and 1945. The camp boasted many activities, a poorly supplied school for children, a hospital, and many sports and social clubs, but, you know, they were still forced to be there and heavily monitored. Way back before the US was even established, the English colony of Jamestown, Virginia was formed in 1607. Just a few years later, settlers experienced what is known as the starving time. The combined effects of the brutal winter of 1609, food shortages, devastating disease, and constant Native American attacks really screwed over colonists who resorted to pure desperation for survival. The colonists ate dogs, rats, their own shoes, and each other in order to survive. 300 settlers saw the beginning of winter, but only 60 saw the beginning of spring. The state of Rhode Island saw around 1,000 slaving voyages between the 18th and 19th century, bringing in an estimated 100,000 slaves to the Americas. The year 1919 saw the occurrence of the Elaine Massacre in Hoopsburg, Arkansas. About 100 African American sharecroppers demanded fairer pricing for their cotton crops as they were frequently underpaid for their labors. During a meeting, which was protected by armed guards, 2 white men rolled up to find out what all the hullabaloo was about. After a brief struggle, some shots were fired, though it's unknown who shot first. One of the men died, the other injured. Well, word got out about the event being a supposed uprising being planned by the black community. In response, several locals and hundreds of US troops were deployed to put an end to the so-called rebellion, resulting in the cold-blooded murder of over 200 African Americans in the area. In 1903, residents of Van Meter, Iowa reported sightings of a strange bat-like humanoid figure for several nights. Dubbed the Van Meter Visitor, the bat-human-dinosaur hybrid monster thing possessed big old flappy wings, sharp claws, and an eerily glowing horn on its melon. Many credible witnesses attested the sightings, and locals, in true American fashion, shot at the creature in an attempt to kill it. It supposedly escaped into a nearby abandoned mine and was never seen again. In the early 1800s, Colonel William H. Jackson once gifted his favorite oak tree its own deed, legally entitling it to its own ownership and all land within an 8-foot radius of itself. The original tree, located in Athens, Georgia, fell in 1942, but not before an acorn sprouted a new sapling, which legally inherited the land. Why is this bad? That's because there's a chance that this tree owns more land than you do. The Bonneville Salt Flats in northwestern Utah look like something out of a dream sequence. Back in the 1920s, with the evolving technology of automobiles, adrenaline junkies would often challenge each other to travel across the flats as fast as possible. Of course, this inevitably led to numerous crashes, breakdowns, and deaths, a tradition that persists to this day. The Silk Strike of 1913 in Paterson, New Jersey was the organized strike of over 25,000 silk workers with the goal of establishing an 8-hour workday and better working conditions. Over the course of the strike's 5-month duration, 300 silk mills had shut down with no workforce, and over 1,800 strikers were arrested for inciting violence. Ultimately, the strike was defeated as influence failed to spread beyond Paterson and no demands were ever met. Speaking of terrible working conditions, the Radium Girls of Ottawa, Illinois were tasked with hand-painting watches with self-luminous paint made from radioactive powdered radium. The women would often point their brushes with their lips to produce finer tips, but their lips inadvertently sipped the radioactive drips, and if one dared to skip the lip tip grip, their managers would flip, so tips remained dipped and their lips remained zipped. Company owners expressed the safety of the material, but actively avoided it themselves. The ingestion of the radium, unsurprisingly, caused multiple women to contract radiation poisoning. Between the years of 1917 and 1927, over 50 women had died from acute radiation syndrome. This sparked public outrage and reforms in labor rights. Radium continued to be used in the production of watch dials up to the 1970s. Multiple residents outside of Exeter, New Hampshire, all reported seeing the same strange light pattern in the sky across several evenings in 1965. The large object reportedly moved silently across the night sky, emitting eerie red lights in a specific pattern. The event terrified locals in the area for years, though skeptics have debunked this event as simply a mid-air refueling drill performed by the United States Air Force. Specifically, KC-97 tankers flashed red lights in the same exact pattern that was described by eyewitnesses. The city of Wilmington, Delaware experienced a catastrophic outbreak of cholera and typhoid fever in the late 1800s thanks to rapid industrialization shitifying up the local water sources. With hundreds sick and dozens dying, the city had to drastically overhaul the local sewer system, including installing a water purification plant in the early 1900s. But at least you can breathe a fresh sigh of relief nowadays. This is a devil's hole pupfish, a critically endangered and supremely cute species of fish found only in the Devil's Hole in the Death Valley National Park in Nevada. Or Nevada for the locals. The fish were first discovered back in the 1940s and were almost immediately attempted to be protected. In 1967, they were officially listed as endangered thanks to local drilling by development companies, which reduced water levels within the cave system. Despite aggressive conservation efforts, there were only 38 of the little guys in existence as of spring 2025, making them one of the most critically endangered species on Earth. The Great Jacksonville Fire of 1901 completely reshaped the city of Jacksonville, Florida. After a rogue kitchen fire broke out, the flames quickly spread to a nearby mattress factory. After more than 8 hours, the inferno finally came under control after completely engulfing the majority of the city, destroying almost 2,400 buildings in the process, rendering 10,000 people homeless and 7 people dead. Now that's what I call a fire sale. Farmers in the late 1960s and early 1970s were pretty pissed to find their precious moo cows slaughtered and mutilated beyond natural means. Investigations clocked in over 8,000 separate mutilations over the years. Some of the bulbous bovines were found to have sedatives in their systems, while others were secretly marked with fluorescent paint. Unidentified aircraft in the area were spotted, suggesting government interventions or possible secret weapons testing, but no conclusive evidence was ever found. 19th century Philadelphia, Pennsylvania saw the rise of several teeth thieves who would go around robbing graves of entire bodies. The corpses would be sold to nearby medical schools for anatomical study, while the teeth were extracted and sold to companies who made dentures. Remember to smile. Kentucky is home to the McCoy family, one half of the infamous Hatfield-McCoy family feud. Initial squabbles began in the 1870s over the Civil War, with the Hatfields being Confederate sympathizers and the McCoys being pro-Union. Across 30 years, multiple lawsuits, thefts, and even murders escalated the feud, with over a dozen family members killed. The feud finally came to an end in the late 1890s. Or did it? About 100 years after the start of it all, descendants of the families came together to duke it out on the game show Family Feud in 1979, with the McCoys coming out on top. Nowadays, the family homes are tourist attractions, holding annual festivals with activities like tug-of-war and sight tours to commemorate the decades-long dispute. Just north of South Dakota is North Dakota, and boy did it suffer a harsh winter in 1936. Record low temperatures plummeted all the way down to negative 60 degrees Fahrenheit. That's negative 51 C for you foreigners. The frigid forecast froze farm fauna fleeing for favorable feverishness. Entire towns burned through their coal supplies, leaving families to die in their homes from exposure. In 1847, nearly 200 Dutch immigrants made their way over from the Netherlands to Wisconsin in search of a better life, but a similar cold climate. After months of crossing the Atlantic and scooting in through to the Great Lakes, the freaky-deaky Dutch were just about to set foot in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, when a poorly maintained boiler overheated, causing a fire to erupt on board the very wooden ship. Unfortunately, the ship only had 2 lifeboats, capable of holding about 20 people each. Of the few hundred people aboard, only 45 managed to escape on the lifeboats. The Phoenix, ironically, went down in a blaze, never to rise from the ashes, because they were washed away. Mysterious deaths surrounding the Ray family had caused concern for the townsfolk of Jewett City, Connecticut. The supposedly healthy family members were stricken down left and right from an undetectable killer. The boys of the family became paler by the day and were seen coughing up blood until ultimately passing away within the coming days. The reasonable cause of death, the townsfolk thought, was vampires. In order to stop the undead from rising and killing others, the recently deceased were exhumed from their graves and burned. The real culprit? Tuberculosis. Conveniently enough, though, the burning of the corpses probably did prevent the contagious disease from spreading any further. Go figure. In 1855, the US government approved the import of several camels to serve as pack animals through the arid landscape of the Southwest, formally establishing the United States Camel Corps. But then the Civil War broke out a few years later in 1861, and the camels were either sold off or completely abandoned in the desert, supposedly being spotted over the next several decades. Roam free, fellas. Boston, Massachusetts is home to the deadliest nightclub fire in US history. The Coconut Grove fire burned itself into people's memories in 1942 with a wealth of poor safety choices leading to the brutal blaze. Exit doors were chained up to prevent unauthorized access, air conditioners were filled with flammable refrigerants, and everyone was packed in like sardines. Not to mention the fact that all of the lavish interior decor could catch fire faster than a witch in Salem. In all, 492 people ended up dying in the inferno. The club owner, Barney Walensky, who was very much aware of his club's safety code violations, was convicted on just 19 counts of manslaughter and was sentenced to just 15 years in prison, though he was pardoned after just 4. He ended up dying a few weeks after release from cancer. Now, when you're chilling in class, the last thing you want to experience is a big old gas explosion. But unfortunately, the students in the New London School in New London, Texas, were about to do just that. Alright class, who could tell me what happens when you hook a big chunk of magnesium into some water? Yep, Ron. That's an easy one. It just, after recently canceling their natural gas supply contract to save a few buckaroos, the school board decided to instead tap into a local gasoline waste line to supplement the demand. The shitty and shoddy plumbing work caused natural gas leaks throughout the school's basement crawl spaces. Now keep in mind that natural gas is colorless and odorless, so no one was really aware of any leaks, except for the students who complained of headaches, though they were ignored by the staff.
You get out of here, go on, get.
The creeping gas cloud was inadvertently ignited on March 18, 1937, causing an instantaneous explosion that killed 295 out of roughly 500 students and staff present in the building. The disaster led to a reform of requiring odorous additives to be added to natural gas supplies for better detection of leaks. If you're looking for a breath of fresh air, New York City is probably not the best place to do so, especially in 1966. The Great New York City smog blanketed the Big Apple in a giant fart cloud of carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and smoke. The dense haze persisted for 3 days across the 1966 Thanksgiving weekend. A public health study estimated that about 10% of the city's population suffered some adverse health effects from sucking in the smelly smog. In the end, 168 New Yorkers ended up biting the dust, prompting President Lyndon B. Johnson and several members of Congress to produce the 1967 Air Quality Act and amendments to the 1970 Clean Air Act, which heavily reduced air pollution down to more manageable levels of toxicity. In the wake of the US Civil War, the South was really hurting for some cheap labor as all of their slaves were just freed thanks to the 13th Amendment. The best alternative? Prisoners. Convicts were extremely cheap compared to full-time employees, so in the early 1890s, Coal Creek mine owners decided to lay off their workforce and instead conscripted convicted criminals to work the mines for pennies on the dollar. But instead of milling around, the recently sacked and salty miners decided to pick a fight, sparking the Coal Creek War of 1891. The manic miners attacked a load of state prisons and mining properties, ensuring their efforts would not be in vain. The National Guard was called in, arresting over 500 workers. The scuffle did result in Tennessee ending their convict leasing program in 1896, so that's a win. Sweet Home Alabama is home to Yellow Mama, an electric chair built in 1927 by master carpenter and inmate Ed Mason. 152 criminals have gotten the sweet, stinging embrace of Yellow Mama's arms, with her final zap being performed in 2002. Since then, death row inmates were given the legal right to choose their demise, either lethal injection or the chair, and to no surprise, they opt for the less painful option. As such, Yellow Mama remains locked away in the attic of the Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama, patiently waiting for her next victim. Imagine your life as a beaver, munching away on a tree or building a dam, when all of a sudden you get yoinked away from your beaver family, put in a tiny box, flown up to the sky, and hucked out of an airplane to be parachuted down miles away from home. That's exactly what the Idaho Department of Fish and Game did in 1948 after locals complained of excessive property damage. 76 beavers were relocated from northwest Idaho to central Idaho via airdrop using leftover World War II parachutes. One beaver died. Very sad. A big-ass swarm of locusts tore across the Midwest in 1874, devastating any and all vegetation, food, clothes, and farming equipment for days on end, with Nebraska taking most of the damage. Water sources were contaminated and livestock were consumed. High estimates place the swarm size at upwards of 12.5 trillion locusts. I mean, there were quite literally a blanket of locusts a foot high off the ground. The swarm, spanning across 2 million square miles, reportedly blocked out the sun for multiple hours during their flight. By the time the locust plague had passed, the Midwest had sustained over $200 million in crop damages. Bennington Triangle, located across southwestern Vermont, saw several people disappear under mysterious circumstances between 1945 and 1950. The most well-known case being the disappearance of 18-year-old student Paula Jean Weldon, who up and vanished in 1946 and was never seen again. The young girl had reportedly left her college campus in the afternoon and proceeded to walk 6 miles to a nearby trail before going missing. Lack of substantial police investigation, evidence, or witnesses left the case cold. The poorly run investigation had prompted the Vermont legislature to create the Vermont State Police just 7 months after Paula Jean's disappearance. Hundreds of Lakota Sioux natives were gunned down during the Wounded Knee Massacre of 1890 after natives began expressing frustration and anger over continued forced relocation and broken promises from the US government. You suck! A new religious movement called the Ghost Dance, a literal dance performed in hopes of ridding the land of white settlers, was seen as a potential act of rebellion.
That's scary, I don't like that.
As a precaution, natives were rounded up and disarmed by the US Army. A misunderstanding surrounding an accidental misfire of a rifle started the massacre, which saw the murder of about 300 native men, women, and children.
Continuing that pattern, Montana had itself one of the worst Native American massacres in US history. The Marias Massacre involved the cold-blooded murder of over 200 Piegan Blackfeet Native Americans, all gunned down by the United States Army near the Marias River in Montana. The whole conflict escalated from years of back-and-forth petty skirmishes, white settlers encroaching on native lands and Blackfeet natives raiding these new settlements. But all came to a climax on the morning of January 23, 1870, where a large force of US cavalrymen gunned down over 200 Blackfoot natives. Since most of the men were out hunting at the time, the majority of the victims were elders, women, and children. Painful ancient medicine. Hundreds and even thousands of years ago, humanity's knowledge of itself was still in its infancy. We had a basic idea of what makes us tick, but that wasn't enough to stop the scientifically curious from fiddling around both outside and inside people's bodies. Alright, just gonna poke around in here and what's the matter, doctor? There's a scary skeleton in you! That being the case, it was up to these early pioneers of medicine to provide solutions to human ailments, be it a simple cough or a giant debilitating pulsating tumor. If you were lucky, you'd find a doctor willing to test out different medicines outside of thoughts and prayers. But some of these treatments would have you begging for mercy from whatever divine being you may have believed in. Take for instance, someone afflicted with hemorrhoids. Yeah, that's how this is starting off. Nowadays, you just go to the corner store, prepare yourself an H, finger your B, and sit at home in complete discomfort. A few days later, you're right as rain. But back in the past, humans did not have such a luxury. Failed treatment could result in some gnarly infections, which, in non-modern times, was a death sentence. Sure, you could go to an apothecary who could whip up a strange mixture of grimy herbs and unidentifiable animal liquids that you could sip on, but that's most likely going to cause intense gastrointestinal distress. You need something that's tried and true. Well, you can iron out that wrinkle near your wrinkle with this, a hot iron rod. The theory's simple. Hemorrhoids are basically small open wounds, so a little bit of cauterization would close them bad boys right up and allow them to heal. This method was actually first used in the 4th century BC by father of medicine, Hippocrates. He apparently was a huge fan of cauterization as a last resort cure-all for most afflictions. Have a bad cough? Sear your throat to a medium rare. Have a headache? A burning rod to the temples will make you forget all about it. Hippocrates was of firm belief that if a condition couldn't be cured with medicine, it could be cured with a knife. If it couldn't be cured with a knife, it could be cured with fire. If it couldn't be cured with fire, well then you're just shit out of luck. The obvious problem with this cure in the rectal region is that it isn't without collateral damage. The application often led skin fusing to the burning rod and getting ripped from the body. Another unfortunate possibility was that the rod was hot enough to burn your skin, but not hot enough to cauterize the hemorrhoids, so you'd only get an appetizer instead of the full meal. You were also under threat of having the target missed completely. One slip, trip, loss of grip, and your back lip's getting a rip. It is reported that patients would claim the rectal remedy was successful, but then again, would you agree to a follow-up treatment if you weren't cured? Probably not. We move on from being a pain in the ass to being a pain in the dick. Metallic catheters have been around for thousands of years, dating all the way back to around 3000 BC. These little guys were used to relieve patients of urinary obstructions which didn't allow for proper passage of pee. Ever lie in bed at night needing to go, but you're too comfy, so you just lie there feeling the pressure building in your bladder? Ever have to hold it in on a long car ride home where you're twitching and groaning, yearning for that sweet urethral flow? Well, then you've experienced a fraction of the pain generated from being physically unable to drain your piss pouch. This was such a prevalent problem throughout history that it was on the high priority list of the super science people of yore. Evidence of early versions of these tools have been found throughout ancient Egypt, Rome, Greece, China, and India, with materials being used ranging from onion stalks to solid gold. The theory was simple. Like a clogged drain, you just gotta poke around in there to clear the blockage. Enter the catheter, which enters you. After snaking around your tract, the tube enters your bladder and provides a cleared path for you to relieve yourself. As will be a common theme throughout this video, ancient times had only rudimentary methods for sedatives such as opiates, herbs, and alcohol to subdue any pain. If these weren't available, you could always bite down on a stick or something while getting a metal tube shoved up your nethers. The insertion procedure was delicate and tricky. Since these tools were handmade, edges could be rough. Without proper care, your internals could get all kinds of tore up, which would certainly have no way of being treated effectively. If improperly cleaned, a catheter could leave behind debris in your bladder, causing infection or even worse, future blockages. So with that, only a properly prepared person performed the painful pubic procedure. As technology evolved, however, catheters became flexible and more ergonomic for both male and female patients with various shapes and sizes to increase comfort, or rather decrease discomfort. But back in those times, a few minutes of sharp pain was well worth the relief of long-term agony and potential kidney failure. Let's just say that without a catheter, you're in for a bad time. Speaking of having a bad time, this would be one of them. As a follow-up to metallic catheters, if the obstruction was a calcified stone too large to pass naturally, surgical intervention may have been in the stars for you. The first recorded practice of lithotomy dates back to ancient Greeks. The word lithotomy derives from the Greek language, with lithos meaning stone and tomos meaning cut. This makes sense as surgeons were quite literally cutting for a stone stuck in your belly. To say that the procedure was not pretty would be a drastic understatement. Nowadays, lithotomy is performed by making a small incision in the abdomen and using a small camera tool to fish around for the offending mass. Back in the day, however, this was a perineal procedure. Your perineum, if you're unaware, is that no man's land between your anus and your junk. Modern scholars refer to it as the taint or the grundle. That's the incision site. It's gonna suck. Lying on your back with your knees pulled to your chest to give the doctor a front row seat to your particulars, a surgeon would make the invasive entry and beeline it for your bladder to attempt removal of the stone, if he could find it. Physical removal was either performed with a hooking tool or with the surgeon's fingers, like he was trying to get the last chip out of a Pringles can. If you were lucky, the stone or stones produced in your body were relatively small in diameter, maybe a quarter inch or less than a centimeter. But as you can imagine, problems arose if these stones were large. Excessive bleeding and internal damage can occur from bladder stones exceeding 1.5 inches or about 4 centimeters, though luckily these were rare. It's no surprise that these surgical procedures were excruciatingly painful. It was almost required that an assistant or two would be present to restrain you during the procedure to avoid any unnecessary damage from involuntary struggling as you endured the pain. After extraction, the patient was sat in a shallow pool of vinegar and salt to halt any bleeding before being stitched up like a teddy bear. There's no question that the procedure sucked, but the long-term benefits outweighed the short-term investment. Capital gains, more like capital pains. Now, I did briefly cover trepanation way back when I thought doing a monotone narration was a good idea, but let's revisit it. So, trepanation is the act of deliberately drilling a hole in one's head for the sake of some kind of medical relief. This could be physical pain like excessive skull pressure or headaches, or for spiritual reasons, as some early societies believed that trepanation allowed for the release of spooky spirits haunting your melon. Trepanation is one of the earliest known surgical procedures performed throughout human history, with evidence being found across the entire globe as far back as the Neolithic era, the end of the Stone Age. So imagine you want to get some relief for your frequent pounding headaches, and your local medicine man whips out his iconic and sharp obsidian slab. Dr. Ooga Booga gives you a smile as he starts carving away at your dome, peeling skin from skull. You'd think that fight or flight mode would kick in, but Next came the actual carving of bone, either by making rectangular intersecting cuts to eventually pop out a square of your skull, or by slowly whittling away at it until reaching your soft, chewy brain like it was a dang Tootsie Pop. There are a few known trepanation methods observed across the world. The first two I just described, rectangular cuts and scraping. The third was the use of a tree find, a hollow-toothed cylinder. This is like popping into your local Home Depot for a Craftsman V20 brushless drill and 2-inch bimetal hole saw set. Is this gonna hurt? Only if you scream. The last and most commonly used method was the drilling of closely spaced holes, usually performed with a bow and flint. Now, having your head carved into is certainly not a pleasurable experience, so you'd probably want the procedure to be over quickly. Well, think again. Since it was known that jamming a sharp object into the brain would almost certainly diminish the surgeon's success rate, trepanation was a long, delicate, and grueling process. Trepanation is still practiced in modern medicine as a craniectomy to treat brain injuries and remove brain tumors. Surprisingly though, the majority of recovered remains showing evidence of trepanation also showed signs of continued bone growth and healing, indicating that these subjects survived their surgeries. It's estimated that around 80% of those who got their noggin knocked ended up living, though it's questionable if they lived well. Imagine spending months or even years training as a warrior, perfecting the art of handling a blade, mastering close combat, and being the embodiment of peak physical strength, only to be taken out by an arrow the moment you step out onto the battlefield. Huge bummer, but all's fair in love and war, and boy, did you love war until about 5 seconds ago. Now lying on the ground, your life slowly slipping away from a simple arm wound, you look up to see a friendly face. It's one of them fancy new soldiers. What do they call them? Oh yeah, medics. His whole job is to make you feel better and to get you back up on your feet. Your other buddies on the battlefield? They can wait a bit. They're not going anywhere. Now, unfortunately for you, the arrow's pretty deep, so things aren't looking too great. Shallow entry wounds you could simply rip out, rub some dirt in it, and call it a day. These deeper wounds, however, they need a bit more persuasion. Most arrowhead designs at the time are barbed. Where they land, they're meant to stay. So here are your options. Option 1. If there's already an exit wound, snap the arrow in two and push it through to the other side. Sorry if you're eating while watching this. Option 2. If there's no exit wound, you're gonna need to pull the arrowhead out. Simply open the entry wound enough to find the arrowhead and gently pull, avoiding the barbs ripping at your delicate insides. Option 3. If the arrowhead is stuck in a bone or too deep to retrieve... Option 4. If you can retrieve the arrow and you want things to be quick like a band-aid, use the classic tooth fairy method. Simply tie the protruding arrow to another arrow and fire away. The offending arrow is ripped out and you're left there in complete and utter agony. Now we just have to dump some honey on that bad boy, wrap it up nice and neat in a filthy cloth covered in mud and dirt, and you'll be back to it in no time.
The fuck?
No, this isn't just chilling out in the living room. This has to do with ancient eye surgery, which honestly makes my toes curl because I hate anything that has to do with eyes. My wife, she constantly tortures me by poking her own eyeball for fun just because she can, and it honestly just heebies my jeebies, so here we go. Couching is the first known surgical procedure to counteract a cataract. What's a cataract? It's the clouding of the natural lens inside of your eyeball. If you know anything about light scattering, you'll know that semi-transparency does a lot of it. Makes your vision go all wonky like you're looking at the world through a steamy shower door, except permanently and much less sexy. Well, not permanently anymore, because them ancient Egyptians found a great way to stab your own eyes and get rid of the problem. However, it would be much later until we got something recorded in fine detail. Around the 6th century BC, ancient Indian physician Sushruta wrote about his breakthrough cataract removal process called couching in his medical texts. Hey, look at this guy. You're telling me you wouldn't put your life in the hands of ancient Indian Santa Claus? Come on. The theory behind couching is what you'd expect. Take a cloudy lens and push it out of the way. This was done with a curved needle to delicately puncture the eye and dislodge the cloudy lens. This was likely very painful, as you're literally ripping out your eye's lens from its natural position. The cataract would either be pushed aside out of the vision pathway or pressed out of the eyeball. Now, to his credit, Sushruta was very mindful of the need to have clean tools and a clean environment for surgeries. He was centuries ahead of European medicine in that regard, but his sterilization techniques weren't perfect. Patients often experienced agonizing infections which inevitably led to the complete loss of vision in the affected eye. It is estimated that roughly 70% of patients were left completely blind due to surgical complications. But hey, if you're gonna go blind anyway, why not take the 30% chance and risk it for the biscuit? Ah, the iconic bloodletting, the basic bitch of ancient medicine. Despite being outright stupid, this practice was used throughout numerous cultures across human history, beginning as early as the ancient Egyptians around 3000 BC, but spreading as far as ancient Rome, Greece, Europe, the Middle East, Asia, Mesoamerica, and Africa. Pretty much everywhere. The prevailing theory was that most ailments were the result of having an imbalance of the four humors in the body. If you're unaware, the four humors theory was developed by none other than our bearded boy, Hippocrates. It states that our bodies consist of four bodily fluids: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. A perfectly normal and healthy person was believed to have these four fluids in perfect balance. Any tip to one extremity can lead to disease and a shift in personality. Having a bad cough? You've got too much phlegm in your system. Cough it up. Got some terrible tummy issues? You got too much yellow bile. Time to touch your uvula. Almost anything else? Well, you've got too much bad quality blood in you, so let's slice open an artery and purge you of your impurities. Now, typically, blood was drained until the patient passed out, which is horrible, stupid, and dumb. Yes, your body constantly produces new blood, but it's also a self-sustaining cycle of breaking down the old and producing new. There's no need to drain the pool. An incision would be made around the inside of your elbow, and your heart would do the rest, pumping out your life force and making you weaker by the second. To no surprise, incisions would often lead to infection, and with less blood in your system and thus less white blood cells to fight off said infection, whatever initial ailment you may have had now pales in comparison to the new pickle you've put yourself in. There's not much humor in that, is there?
So, I decided to be a little silly with this chapter. Enjoy this cringe. Oh, oops.
In today's times, you can count yourself blessed, cause modern dentistry is the best that it gets. But step into the past, that pain gets intense. No Novocaine blast, no numbing defense. Impactions, extractions, gonna ruin your day. This dental interaction to rid you of decay. Looking for pliers? Now try a bronze hook. Yanking at your teeth without a second look. Hold still, time to draw you shady surgeon, please. But you can't even hear him through your shrieks and screams. Sharpened stone to the bone, now you're all alone. As you groan and you moan on this painful throne. Need relief? Try this. Here, give that a taste. Don't feel a difference, cause it's dead mouse paste. Have some opium to try to dull the throb. Well, now you're just high and you're still gonna sob. So sit in that chair, chewing on your herbs, cause you're gonna feel despair when he strikes that nerve. The gravity of cavities is taking its toll, but it's agony, insanity surging through your soul. Pull it out, that tooth is gone. You scream and you shout in your perpetual yawn. All done now, you're good for a bit. Just chug the sheep wine, okay, now spit. That shit sucked, but at least you're alive, so you can even leave a like or hit that subscribe. Chat history, bringing you horrible dad raps. Alright, here's another video. Go click it. I'll see you over there.